I never believed the stories about immortals living on a mortal mountain. To me, it was just a place I climbed every day to hunt and survive. But today I witnessed something so bizarre it made my skin crawl. It was a beautiful autumn day, the kind of afternoon where the mountain looked like a painting. Most hunters stayed out late, and young couples usually lingered in the woods until dark, but I was busy. I pushed through the thick brush near a small creek, my head popping out from behind the leaves. I was about 12 or 13, a bit thin from a life of constant climbing and hunting, but I was tall and strong for my age. I leaped out from the bushes and landed firmly on a flat stone ledge. In one hand, I carried 2 pheasants and a wild rabbit. In the other, I gripped my homemade wooden spear. A bow and a quiver of arrows were strapped to my back. My shins were covered in scratches from the jagged rocks and branches, but I didn't care. As long as I didn't hurt my family jewels, everything else was just a scratch. It was nearly noon, and my stomach was growling. I headed down to the pool by the ledge to clean one of the pheasants. I gathered some dry wood, pulled out my fire starter, and got a small blaze going. The other pheasant and the rabbit were for my parents. Tomorrow, once my father finished the farm work, he'd take them to town to trade for supplies. I leaned back on the stone ledge, crossing my legs and chewing on a piece of grass while watching the clouds. I couldn't help but think about Xiaoying, the girl from the family across the way. She was pretty, and she always smiled when she saw me. We used to play together all the time until we played house once. I was the groom, and I took the chance to give her a little kiss. Her father saw us, and ever since then, he'd been guarding her like a hawk. It was a tragedy, really. Suddenly, I spotted a black dot in the sky. It was falling fast, heading straight for me. Before I could even jump out of the way, it slammed into the creek pool with a massive splash. Holy Mother, I gasped. Was it really an immortal? I'd heard the legends. They said 2 immortals once fought on this mountain. One lost and became the mountain's spirit, while the winner flew back to the heavens, leaving a celestial sword behind to pin the loser down. I always thought it was just a story, though people said there were cultivation sects far away where people actually flew on swords. As the spray settled, a gray shape floated to the surface. I gripped my spear, hoping it wasn't a monster. As it drifted closer, I saw a person in tattered clothes. Their hair was a tangled mess floating on the water. I raised my spear, ready to strike, but then I saw bubbles. The person coughed, choking on water, struggling feebly but unable to swim to shore. All right, so it was a living person. But who falls out of the sky? If he was an immortal, would he really be drowning in a shallow creek? He was a freak, for sure, but I wasn't heartless. I figured saving him might earn me some good karma. Maybe enough that Xiao Ying's dad would stop chasing me away. I hooked the man's collar with the blunt end of my spear and dragged him to the edge of the stone. I propped him up against the rock and then backed away a few paces, squatting down to get a good look at him. He looked like a Taoist priest, but he was ugly. He had a face like a skinny monkey, a goatee, and his robes were shredded as if he'd been whipped. He spat out a mouthful of water and finally caught his breath. "Kid, you've got guts," he wheezed. "Meeting me today is enough for you to brag about for the rest of your life." I stared at him, bewildered. Was this old man crazy? "Hey, kid, why aren't you talking?" he barked. "Are you intimidated by my majestic presence?" He reached up to stroke his goatee, but his finger hit a cut on his lip. He hissed in pain, his face contorting. I couldn't help it. I started laughing. "Old man, how did you fall out of the sky?" I asked. "Old man, who are you looking down on?" he yelled, looking offended. "I am the most famous thief in the immortal realm. Sikong Jiayue. Even the big shots up there call me Master Skillful Hand. Everyone trembles when they see me." He was spitting everywhere, acting like I should be honored to meet him. "Right. So, old man Jiayue, why did you fall out of the sky?" "You're asking for a beating, kid," he roared. "My name is Yuan Xiao, not kid." I snapped back. I raised my spear and pointed it at him. He blinked, looking surprised. "Heh, you've got spirit," he muttered, turning arrogant again. "Reminds me of myself when I was young." "Old man, you should probably cover the hole in your pants before you keep bragging," I said. "Your butt is hanging out." I didn't believe a word he said. Sikong Jiayue looked down and realized his robes were torn right across his backside from a whip strike. He let out a long, dramatic sigh. To think that I, Sikong Jiayue, Would lose my dignity in front of a snot-nosed brat, he lamented. Listen, I was just at the Heavenly Lord's palace for a party. I got a bit drunk and wandered into the storehouse. I saw a few shiny things and decided to borrow them. I knew the Lord would want me to stay if I asked to leave, so I just left without saying goodbye. But they're so petty. They sent their guards after me and used a treasure to seal my powers and my physical strength. Otherwise, I would have thrashed them. I finally understood. This old guy was a thief who got caught stealing at a party and was now on the run. It made sense why people trembled when they saw him. They were probably checking their pockets. My powers are gone, he groaned. I don't know how long the seal will last. Could be 10 years, could be 2 months. Who knows what that lord was thinking? What a nightmare. Suddenly, his nose twitched. He looked over at my fire. Kid, what are you roasting? It smells incredible. Hurry up and give me a taste. I suddenly remembered the wild pheasant was perfectly roasted. I hopped back onto the stone platform and pulled the bird from the fire. I sprinkled a bit of salt and pepper on it, tore off a drumstick, and started chewing. I didn't offer any to the old man. I didn't know him any respect yet. Sikong Jaiyue watched me, swallowing hard. His throat bobbed as he stared at the meat. Since his powers and physical strength were sealed, he couldn't absorb spiritual energy. He was just like a regular person now. He needed to eat and drink. Even immortals have cravings for good food, but for him, this was survival. Old man, you talk a big game, I said, my mouth full of chicken. How do I know you aren't just making things up? You said you took things from the Heavenly Lord's palace. Show me. If I see them, I'll believe you. Then you can eat. I clearly didn't trust him. Sikong Jaiyue beat his chest and wailed about the downfall of morality. He complained that the youth had no respect for their elders. But then, he smirked. He rubbed a ring on his finger, for items suddenly appeared on the ground. I blinked. He had a storage ring that didn't require magic to open. That was a handy trick. The first item was a wine cup. He called it the Bacchus cup. He claimed any wine poured into it would taste heavenly. If you left just a tiny sip at the bottom, it would absorb spiritual energy and refill itself. It was a drunkard's dream. The second was a small shuttle. He said it was a tool for breaking seals and traveling across boundaries. It could fly incredibly fast or even tear through space to different realms. It was a perfect tool for a getaway. The third was a strange stone called an integration stone. He explained that different realms naturally repel outsiders. Mortals can't stay in the immortal realm, and immortals can't stay in the mortal world for long without being pushed out. This stone eliminated that rejection. The fourth item was a bead. It was colorless and transparent. If you didn't look closely, you wouldn't even know it was there. Occasionally, a faint mist swirled around it. It looked mysterious. The old man didn't explain this one. He had just grabbed it and didn't actually know what it did. But if it was in the Heavenly Lord's vault, it had to be valuable. I realized then that this old guy really was an immortal, or at least a very talented thief. Who else could pull items out of thin air? The first 3 items sounded amazing, but they were useless to me. I didn't care about wine or traveling to other worlds. But that transparent bead caught my eye. I reached out and touched it. It was ice cold and felt incredibly smooth. Before I could grab it, Sikong Jaiyue waved his hand. All 4 items vanished back into his ring. Seen enough? He bragged. This ring is huge. It could fit this entire mountain inside. I don't even need magic to use it. Now give me that chicken. I kept my word. I handed over the pheasant. He had been running all day and was starving. He tore into the bird like a wild animal. There was nothing immortal about the way he ate. Old man, let me play with that bead again, I said. He hesitated, but he had a mouth full of my food. He rubbed the ring and handed the bead over. Just for a minute. You have to give it back. The bead felt light, smaller than a pigeon's egg. It was so clear I could see the ground right through it. As I stared into it, I felt my mind starting to drift, like I was being pulled inside. I shook my head to snap out of it. The old man was already finishing the chicken and waving for me to return the treasure. Let's make a deal, I suggested. Lend this to me for a while, or I'll trade you another pheasant for it. Do I look stupid? He barked. 1 chicken for a treasure from the Heavenly Palace? I don't know what it does, but anything from that vault is worth half a street in the immortal realm. You borrowed it anyway, I countered. If you don't lend it to me, You'll probably lose it soon anyway. Look up. Sikong looked at the sky and turned pale. Two streaks of light were screaming toward us. He panicked and threw a golden cloth out of his ring. It expanded instantly, covering both of us. Good thing I have treasures that don't need magic, he hissed. The cloth was a hidden barrier. From the inside, we could see and hear everything outside, but to the world, we were invisible. Two figures landed by the water. They were the heavenly guards. One was a woman in flowing white robes named Ziyi. She was beautiful but carried a long whip, the same one that had shredded the old man's pants. The other was a massive man in heavy armor named Heishan. He looked like a walking fortress. He was just here, Heishan said, looking around the pond. He must have a trick we don't know about. Sikong Jeyue is a joke at fighting, Ziyi replied, but no one is better at running and hiding. That's why he's the greatest thief in the realm. He's hard to catch. The old man bristled when she called him a bad fighter, but he beamed with pride when she praised his hiding skills. He tried to stroke his chin confidently, but his burned lips stung, making him wince instead. What if I just walked out right now? I asked, a mischievous grin spreading across my face. If they find us, do you think they'd tie you up and drag you back first? Sikong Jeyue's face turned bright red. You brat, don't you dare. I didn't say another word. I simply stood up and made a move to step out from under the golden cloth. The old man lunged forward, grabbing my hand with a death grip. Suddenly, his fury vanished, replaced by a beaming, desperate smile. Brother, my dear younger brother, he chirped, his voice dripping with fake affection. The moment I saw you, I felt like we were family. It's just a little bead, right? What's the big deal? I'll lend it to you for a few months. We're practically blood. He changed faces faster than a performer in a play. He didn't even blush as he switched from calling me a brat to calling me his dear brother. Brother, I replied, my voice just as thick with mock emotion. I knew the moment I saw your face that you were a man with a cold exterior but a warm heart. When you said no earlier, you were clearly joking. What older brother wouldn't look out for his younger sibling? It's just a bead. To a man of your stature, it's nothing. In fact, with how much you love me, you'd probably give it to me as a gift without even blinking, right? I said it with such conviction I almost believed myself. Brother, the old man cried out, his eyes welling with tears. Internally, I knew he wanted to slap me across the face, but with two killing machines waiting outside, he had to play along. He couldn't risk me exposing our position. Brother, I cried back, my own eyes turning red. I kept pretending to struggle, pulling toward the edge of the barrier until he finally reached into his robes. He pulled out a glowing bead and shoved it into my palm. The moment my fingers closed around it, I stopped struggling. I threw an arm around his shoulder like we were best friends. Now that's what I call brotherly love, I whispered. Sikong Jeyue looked like he wanted to weep. I could practically hear his thoughts. I'm a thief, but this kid is a straight-up robber. Outside, the guard named Heishan scanned the area. He couldn't find a trace of the old man's aura. He turned to the woman, Ziyi. Do we even know what was stolen from the heavenly palace this time? He asked. The chief steward said a few items went missing, Ziyi replied. Most are rare but replaceable. However, one is the apocalypse bead. It has a very unique effect. The heavenly lord intended to give it to the child of an old friend. It would be best if we could recover it, but mostly, this is about face. Sikong Jeyue stole from a royal banquet. He needs to be disciplined. Just a small discipline? Heishan rubbed his chin. It seems this old thief isn't as simple as we thought. He must have connections if even the heavenly palace won't get serious with him. He spent years robbing every major estate in the immortal realm, and he's still breathing. There's more to him than just fast legs. Suddenly, Heishan's expression shifted. Ziyi, the rejection force of the mortal realm is getting stronger. I can't suppress it much longer. We have to return. Our cultivation is being crushed by the world barrier. If we run into a top-tier mortal cultivator, we might actually be in danger. We can't forget there are still forces here that rebel against the heavens. The steward said it would be best to recover it, not mandatory, Ziyi noted. The apocalypse bead carries its own destiny. It isn't a weapon, but it doubles the speed of one's cultivation. If it's lost to the mortal world, perhaps that is simply fate. Maybe that's what the Lord intended. Heishan nodded. He tossed a jade treasure into the air, creating a bubble of light that enveloped them both. With a flash, they shot into the clouds and vanished. I exhaled, feeling the tension leave my chest. I started to step out, but the old man grabbed my arm, signaling me to wait. Sure enough, 10 minutes later, Heishan and Ziyi reappeared out of thin air exactly where they had been standing. It seems he really isn't here, Ziyi muttered. Let's go. They flew off again. See that, brother? The old man bragged, puffing out his chest. That's what experience looks like. He stood up to leave, but this time, I was the one who yanked him back. Wait a bit longer. We sat in silence for another 15 minutes. For the third time, the two guards flickered back into existence. They did one final, thorough sweep of the pond, found nothing, and finally ascended for real, disappearing into the void. Sikong Jiayue started cursing at the sky. Are all immortals this sneaky now? Do they have no humanity left? He seemed to forget he was an immortal himself. I was stunned. Those two looked so dignified and righteous, yet they were as cunning as foxes. It was a hell of a first impression of the immortal realm. I looked at the apocalypse bead in my hand. Based on what Ziyi said, this thing was a game changer for my training. We began the trek down the mountain toward my home. My village was called Xinxian Town, though everyone just called it Immortal Town because it sat at the foot of the peaks. My house was at the very end of the last row of buildings, right against the base of the mountain. My family and our neighbors, the Su family, had been close for years. My father and Su Kai were old hunting buddies. Because of that, I grew up constantly playing with his son, Su Ying. Honestly, if we hadn't been caught playing house and trying to sneak a kiss years ago, Su Ying and I would probably still be inseparable. Thinking about it made my head hurt. I had no choice but to bring the old man with me. The Heavenly Lord had sealed his powers and his physical strength. In the mortal world, he couldn't absorb any spiritual energy. He was slightly tougher than a normal human, but he still got hungry, tired, and hurt. He was back to being a weakling, just like when he first started his path thousands of years ago. But the old man wasn't worried. He had a storage ring full of treasures. Even if he couldn't use magic, he had plenty of passive artifacts that worked on their own. Plus, he had a silver tongue. He figured he could always make a living as a fake fortune teller if things got desperate. I realized the old man wasn't all bad. Even though he groaned and complained about losing the apocalypse bead, he didn't try to steal it back once we were safe. He had a code. He only robbed the rich and never touched the poor. He had a bit of honor in him. Dad, Mom, I'm back, I shouted as we reached the little fenced yard. I told the old man to wait at the gate while I went inside to explain why I was bringing home a scruffy, burned old stranger. My father was a middle-aged man in his 40s, still in his prime. He was a master at both farming and hunting. When I walked in, he was busy sharpening his hunting tools. Autumn and winter were the best seasons for hunting, and having sharp gear made the job 10 times easier. Your mother is in the back room, my father said without looking up. A moment later, a middle-aged woman stepped out. She wasn't a classic beauty, but she had a natural, kind warmth about her. She immediately took the wild game off my shoulders and looked me over with concern. Did you get hurt in the mountains this time? She asked. I instinctively glanced down at my calves. During the hunt earlier that day, I had definitely been scratched by sharp rocks and branches. I had 2 distinct cuts. I was about to lie and say I was fine so she wouldn't worry, but she had already noticed my gaze. She leaned down and saw a few spots of dried blood on my pant legs. She quickly pulled up the fabric to check the wounds, but she froze. There was nothing there. There aren't any wounds, she said, sounding confused. Then where did this blood come from? I was stunned. I looked down myself. The places where I'd been cut that morning were now perfectly smooth. My skin was flawless. I stared harder, squinting until I saw 2 incredibly faint marks where the cuts used to be. They were so blurry that if you weren't looking for them, you'd never know they existed. A chill ran down my spine. How was this possible? How did I heal so fast? Then it clicked. Today, I had met 2 immortals. I had met the god of thieves, Sikong Jiayue, and he had given me a treasure called the Apocalypse Bead, which was still clutched in my hand. This had to be one of the magical effects the purple leaf immortal mentioned. The bead had healing properties. I made a mental note to study it properly later. Just then, a loud cough came from the yard gate. It seemed my big brother Jaehue was worried I had forgotten about him. "Dad, Mom," I called out. "This is an old immortal I met today. We hit it off, and I've taken him in as my older brother. Brother, come on in." The old man, Jaehue, finally stepped into the yard. He cupped his hands in a polite greeting. "Brother, sister-in-law, don't mind the oddness," he said smoothly. "Yuan Shao and I are like old friends who met late in life. We call each other brothers now. I really like this kid." Even though he was still mourning the loss of his apocalypse bead, Jaehue was actually grateful. I had helped him escape disaster twice in one day. He was an ancient immortal, so he wouldn't say it directly, but the feeling was there. My parents were honest, kind-hearted people. They didn't care about his scruffy, slightly shady appearance. They immediately started preparing wine and wild game to host their son's new brother. After 3 bowls of wine, Jaehue's tongue started to loosen. His true self began to emerge. Now that he was trapped in a mortal body, he got drunk easily. It turned out he had a huge appetite for alcohol, but a very low tolerance. His drunk personality was definitely questionable. He slapped my father on the shoulder and started bragging. "Listen, brother, I've been everywhere. The 5 continents of the mortal world, the 9 heavens of the immortal realm. I've walked them all. The top sects, the high palaces. I come and go as I please. Every time I leave, they beg me to stay. They even try to force me. But do I listen? Never." He went on and on, listing one great achievement after another. My father just nodded, assuming it was the ramblings of a drunk old man. We were just commoners. What were the odds of an actual immortal sitting at our table? As the night grew cold, my father wrapped a coat around the old man's shoulders. My mother noticed the food getting cold and took the dishes back to the kitchen to reheat them. I sat there, listening intently. I was the only one who knew that even if he was exaggerating, most of it was probably true. We had just outrun 2 powerful beings today. The bead in my hand was proof enough. Suddenly, Jaehue went quiet. "Little brother," he said softly. "In my life, I've never lacked anything. Money, treasures, fame, I had it all. But I lacked a warm home. I lacked care. Today, in this house, I felt it. I haven't felt this kind of warmth in 1,000 years. I missed it. I really, really like this." He turned his bleary eyes toward me. "And you're actually interested in my stories. For years, I've been stealing things just so someone might notice me. Just so someone might hear my story. Thank you, kid." Suddenly, he stood up. He wobbled to the doorway and pointed outside. "Listen, this house is positioned well, but it's too close to the mountain. Too much energy. You need this warm jade talisman to balance it out. It'll help you live longer and keep sickness away." He tapped his storage ring. A piece of jade flew out, dove into the dirt, and vanished. Instantly, a wave of warmth washed over the yard. It felt like a gentle spring breeze. We all felt a sudden surge of energy. "Mortals face many storms in 100 years, he continued, his voice growing grander. "Even if you are good people, danger will find you. So, I'll leave this heaven, earth, and man defense array here. It can block at least 3 fatal attacks from anyone below the Great Perfection stage. The weaker the attack, the more times it works. I hope you never need it." More items flew from his ring, array flags that buried themselves around the house. The ground vibrated slightly, then went silent. Jaehue looked at my stunned parents and smirked. "See that? That's an immortal. That's treasure. Nobody has more treasures than me." I was staring in disbelief. This guy was a total pushover when he was drunk. He turned into a literal wealth-distributing boy. If I had known this, I wouldn't have worked so hard to snatch that bead earlier. "Brother, sit back down. Have a few more bowls," I urged, grabbing his hand. I poured 2 more bowls of wine and set them in front of him. Jaehue was loving the attention. He downed a bowl in one go. "Son, he's had enough," my mother scolded me. "Don't give him more. If he passes out, he'll feel terrible later." "No way," I laughed, pouring even more. I was terrified of him sobering up too soon. My brother isn't immortal. A little wine won't hurt him. "The kid is right," Jaehue shouted. "I used to be able to drink 1,000 bowls and stay sober. Do I look drunk? I'm fine." While he was busy talking, I pushed another bowl into his hand. He drained it. "Brother," I said, leaning in close. That ring of yours is pretty nice. Do you have one a guy like me could use? Maybe you could sell me one. Sell you one? Yahello looked offended. What kind of friendship is that? You think I'd take your money? I have a reputation to uphold. He reached into his pocket, or rather, his storage space, and slapped a black ring into my palm. I know you're not a cultivator. You don't have magic or spiritual energy. Normally, you couldn't use a storage ring. But who am I? I'm the man with the most treasures in the world. I actually have a ring that doesn't require magic to open. He pointed to my hand. Put it on your ring finger. See that tiny spot on the side? Press it twice, and the space will open. I slipped the storage ring onto my left ring finger. I felt around for that hidden black dot on the side and pressed it twice. Instantly, a massive void opened up in my mind. It was huge. It had to be 50 or 60 times larger than my entire fenced-in front yard. My heart skipped a beat. I was ecstatic. This old man's collection was no joke. The space is linked to your mind through the ring now, the old man said, looking at me like I was a clueless kid. He grinned with pride. Go on, touch something you want to put inside. See what happens. I reached for the wine bowl on the table. I focused and thought, go in. With a faint flash, the bowl vanished. It was sitting right there in the storage space. I thought, come out, and it reappeared in my hand. This was incredible. I started feeling playful. I grabbed the old man's arm and shouted, go in. He didn't budge. He just sat there, laughing so hard tears started rolling down his face. It only works on objects, kid. You can't store living people or animals in there, he wheezed. To do that, you'd need to be at a much higher cultivation level. You'd need spirit beast bags, spatial rings with pocket dimensions, or powerful spells. You aren't there yet. He wiped his eyes and leaned back. Listen, little brother. You have the apocalypse bead now. If the people from the heavenly palace wanted it, it must have incredible powers. Take your time to study it. He looked toward the window, his expression turning serious. The world is divided into 5 continents. We are in the northern part of Baping continent. Cultivation-wise, this place is lagging behind. The East Sea and Shining continents are a step above us. But the real power is in the Central Plains and Manhwa. That's where the top masters live. I listened intently. He explained how vast the world was. Unless a cultivator reached the nascent soul stage or higher, they might never see all 5 continents in a single lifetime. I've traveled here before, he continued. There are some small sects nearby, places like the White Peak and Cloud Sea sects. They're just branches of the Greater White Cloud sect. Then there's the Sea Peak and Tide sects. If you want to start your journey, those are good places to learn the basics. He sighed, looking at his hands. I need to go back to my home in the East Sea archipelago. I have business to settle. I've lost my magic, and I don't know when the seal will break. Staying here is dangerous. Even immortals aren't invincible in the mortal realm. If we run into a top-tier cultivator and can't retreat, we can die just like anyone else. The wine finally caught up to him. He kept talking until his head started nodding, and soon he was snoring loudly. I hauled him up and carried him to the bed in the side room, tucking him in. I sat under the lamp and pulled out the apocalypse bead. I rolled up my pant leg to check the wounds from the mountain earlier. They were gone. My skin was smooth, even softer than before. Did the bead have healing powers? I had to know. I grabbed a small knife and made a tiny cut on my finger, just enough to see blood. I wasn't stupid enough to gash myself open for a test. I held the bead in my palm, closing my hand over the cut. Something was happening. Within minutes, the wound itched, scabbed over, and the scab fell off. My skin was perfect again. This was a game changer. Whether I was hunting or cultivating, getting hurt was inevitable. With this bead, I had a literal lifesaver. I also noticed a thin layer of grime on my skin. I figured I just got dirty in the mountains, but it felt strange. Eventually, exhaustion hit me. I leaned my head on the table and fell fast asleep. When I woke up, the sun was just beginning to peek over the horizon. The old man was still out cold. I felt disgusting. My hands and wrists were covered in thick, black sludge. I checked my chest and face. It was everywhere. I'm filthy, I thought. Is this the beads doing too? Despite the grime, I felt amazing. I was bursting with energy. I slipped out to the stream behind the house to wash off. Even though it was autumn and the water should have been freezing, I felt warm. It was like a set of invisible chains had been lifted off my body. When I finished, I noticed my skin was much fairer. Every blemish and scar was gone. By the time I got back, my parents were up. They stared at me, completely stunned. I used to be thin and dark from working in the sun, but now I looked radiant. My skin was clear, and even my old childhood scars had vanished. If they didn't know me so well, they probably wouldn't have recognized me. The old man finally stumbled out of the side room. He took one look at me and nodded. "Looks like a marrow cleansing effect," he said. "It pushed the impurities out of your body to give you a perfect physical foundation. Usually, you need a high-level manual for that. Since you haven't practiced any, it has to be the bead." "I figured as much," I said. "I feel light as a feather." "The bead likely purifies and detoxes," the old man added. "Try it on other things when you can. It was meant for a god, after all. It's bound to have more secrets. Anyway, it's time for me to go." "Wait." I ran inside and started grabbing things. I packed bags of rice, flour, a pot, a small stove, and utensils. I knew he had the storage ring, so carrying it wouldn't be a burden. The old man's eyes turned red. He looked genuinely moved. "And this," my mother said, stepping forward. She handed him a small cloth pouch filled with silver and copper coins. "For your travels." The old man looked like he was about to burst into tears. My heart skipped a beat. I actually felt a pang of sadness. "Brother," I said, my voice thick, "I'm really going to miss you. You have to stay safe out there. Don't let those high and mighty immortals corner you. I'm waiting for the day we meet again." I grabbed my own bedding and bundled it up, shoving it into his arms. The old man finally lost it. He started sobbing out loud, his shoulders shaking. "This family," he wailed. "You've treated an old man like me too well. How can I just leave like this? I should give Brother Yuan something else." He wiped his eyes. He looked a mess, but his gaze was sincere. "In my whole life, nobody has ever been this good to me," he sniffled. "I can handle a lot of things, but I can't handle kindness. I'll be honest, when I woke up and realized what I'd given you last night, my heart hurt. I felt a bit of regret. But now, I'm moved to pieces. Those treasures aren't worth a damn compared to this." He reached into his robes and pulled something out. "Little brother, take this. Remember that concealment treasure I used when the immortals flew over us yesterday? It's called the Divine Hidden Fish. If you're in danger, pull it out of your storage ring and activate it. Even a god would have a hard time finding you. I might be a coward when it comes to fighting, but when it comes to hiding and running, I'm the best in the world." I stood there, mouth agape. I felt like I had missed out on a mountain of gold the night before. If I had just been this nice to him while he was drunk, would he have covered my floor in treasures? "I'm off," he shouted. He didn't linger. With a flick of his storage ring, he swept up everything we had given him. He turned and walked away without looking back. "Brother, wait for me. I'll find you in the East Sea Archipelago." I yelled after him. Jiayu didn't turn around. He just raised a hand and gave a casual wave. It was a stylish exit. I had to admit, I admired the old guy. He was a braggart and a bit full of himself, but he had a real soul. He followed a code. He was a man of character. "Yuan Xiao." A crisp voice cut through my thoughts. I looked toward the gate. It was Xiaoying. She was standing outside the fence, waving at me with a mischievous grin. I hurried over. My parents shared a knowing look and slipped back inside to give us some space. "Where have you been?" I asked. "I haven't seen you in days." "My parents took me to the city to visit my aunt," she said. "We stayed longer than planned. My aunt and my parents were talking. They saw a notice. The Cloud Sea sect is recruiting outer disciples soon. They want me to try out." She looked at me hopefully. "Yuan Xiao, can you come with me?" This was perfect. I was already planning on finding someone to ask about cultivation. "I was just thinking about that," I told her. "It would be great to go together. But I need to talk to my parents first." Xiaoying looked at my face and suddenly started giggling. "Why are you so fair all of a sudden?" She didn't say it out loud, but I could tell she thought I looked a lot more handsome, too. "I've always been this handsome, okay?" I said, jokingly smoothing back my hair. "Shameless," she laughed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a handful of dried dates, my favorite. I reached out to take them, leaning in a bit. "The dates are good," I whispered playfully, "but they aren't as sweet as you, Xiaoying." Her face turned bright red. We had played house together when we were kids, and my teasing clearly hit a nerve. "You really are shameless," she stammered. I wanted to keep teasing her, but I felt a sudden, murderous chill. I caught a glimpse of a figure out of the corner of my eye. My heart dropped. I let go of her hands and jumped back a full step, panicking. The dates spilled all over the ground. "Oh no," I hissed. "It's Uncle Sue." "Xiaoying, time for dinner," her father barked. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and walked away. Xiaoying realized why I had suddenly bolted and burst out laughing at my terrified expression. "I'm going," she called out. "I'll come find you in a few days." I stood there in mock despair. My luck was terrible. I couldn't even talk to a girl for 5 minutes without her dad catching me. I lived in a place called Seeking Immortal Town. For normal people here, life was hard. Most families were like mine, working all year just to stay fed. If a child wanted to change their fate, joining a cultivation sect was the only way. If a family produced a powerful cultivator, their entire lineage would rise. A single foundation establishment or golden core cultivator could make a family prosperous for generations. I sat down and took stock of my situation. Xiaoyu had given me everything I needed to start. My body was purified. I had the apocalypse bead for healing. I had a storage ring that didn't require mana. And now, I had the divine hidden fish for protection. But my top priority was the bead. I needed to know what else it could do. Xiaoyu suspected it could purify and refine things. It was time for an experiment. I placed the apocalypse bead in the center of my table. I grabbed 3 medicinal pills I had from a local doctor. I placed one right against the bead. I put the second 1 foot away. The third, I placed 6 feet away. I waited for the time it takes an incense stick to burn. When I checked the results, my heart raced. Xiaoyu was right. The pill touching the bead had changed completely. A thin layer of black residue had formed on its surface. I gave it a light shake, and the black gunk fell off, revealing a crystal-clear pill underneath. This was the refined version, pure and potent. The pill 1 foot away had some residue, but it wasn't finished. The one 6 feet away hadn't changed at all. The conclusion was simple. The apocalypse bead could refine pills. The closer the object, the faster it worked. Beyond a certain distance, it did nothing. This was a god-tier power. But could I use it in public? Absolutely not. A common man is innocent, but carrying a jade treasure makes him a target. If anyone found out, I'd be dead within a day. Even people I cared about couldn't know. The less they knew, the safer they were. But how could I use it without being seen? Then it hit me. The storage ring. I threw the bead and a few more pills into the ring, placing them side by side in the void space. I waited. An incense stick later, I checked. The pills inside the ring were perfectly refined. I let out a breath of relief. I could hide the bead inside the ring and refine items in total secrecy. With this treasure, my path to immortality was finally opening up. If I still couldn't compete with others after all this, I might as well find a block of tofu and bash my head against it until I died. I wasn't the smartest guy around, but I'd been hunting in the mountains since I was a kid. I knew how to suffer, and I knew how to bleed. I had a tough body and a will of iron. Even without the apocalypse bead, I didn't think I was worse than anyone else. With it, I was unstoppable. My parents supported my decision completely. I had a dream and the tools to make it happen, so they had no reason to hold me back. If I succeeded in cultivation, I wouldn't have to spend my life facing the yellow earth with my back to the sun, slaving away in the fields like they did. The path to immortality was waiting. I was coming for it. I sat alone, holding the apocalypse bead in my palm, slowly turning it between my fingers. Something felt off. The bead wasn't perfectly round. As I rotated it, I felt a tiny indentation. The bead was nearly transparent, so you couldn't see the flaw with your eyes, but my fingertips caught it. It was a microscopic pit, smaller than a sesame seed. I held it up to the light, squinting. I noticed that the faint, misty clouds that occasionally swirled around the bead were actually leaking out from that tiny hole. Was there a hidden world inside this thing? What was this mist, and where did it come from? As I stared into the indentation, my vision blurred. A wave of dizziness hit me so hard I nearly fell over. It felt like my consciousness was being ripped out of my body, sucked into that tiny hole like a vacuum. My head throbbed with a sharp, stabbing pain. I let out a low groan and yanked my gaze away. The pulling sensation stopped instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs. That was terrifying. What was that force? Why did it hurt so much? I wish Sikong Jiayue was still here. He would have known the answer, or at least pointed me in the right direction. Now, I had to figure it out on my own. Maybe, like he said, some answers only come once you reach a certain level of power. I tucked the bead away, my hands still shaking. I needed to focus on the present. Before he left, Jiayue had set up 2 formations at my house. The first balanced the yin and yang, making the air warm and spring-like, which would help my parents live long, healthy lives. The second was a defensive array that could block at least 3 fatal attacks from anyone below the Great Perfection stage. Knowing my parents were safe and healthy made it much easier for me to leave. 2 days later, it was time to head to Cloud Sea City. I wasn't going alone. Joining me were Xiao Ying and a guy I'd grown up with named Hu Lai. The 3 of us were heading to the Cloud Sea Sect tryouts. We used to play together as kids, though Xiao Ying and I were always the bride and groom, while Hu Lai was stuck being the lookout at the door. Hu Lai's family was rich. His parents were successful merchants who fed him so well he looked like a little meatball. They weren't very educated, though, which explained why they named him Hu Lai, a name that literally meant reckless. Hu Lai had been to Cloud Sea City and even White Peak City before. He'd seen cultivators flying through the sky and had been obsessed ever since. He begged his parents to let him join the tryouts, dreaming of the day he could fly, too. The Cloud Sea sect was massive. They had recruitment points in every county within 1,000 miles. We didn't have to walk all the way to the main city yet. We just had to reach the reception point in Pingan County. From there, the sect would transport everyone together. Hu Lai's father arranged a carriage and a driver for us. Since we were friends, he invited Xiao Ying and me to hitch a ride. Our parents were happy we had company. Hu Lai was a bit of a smooth talker and a flatterer. He'd learned too much from his parents' business dealings, but he was a good kid at heart. Leaving home is always easier when you have friends. If we were lucky enough to get picked, we'd be far from home for a long time. Having someone to lean on meant we wouldn't be so lonely. Hu Lai brought a mountain of luggage, food, drinks, toys, you name it. Xiao Ying just had 2 small cloth bundles. I had everything tucked away in my storage ring, but to avoid looking suspicious, I carried a small, empty bag over my shoulder. As we prepared to leave, Hu Lai's parents pulled him aside, telling him to speak politely and give gifts if he had to. They told him that if he didn't get picked, he should just enjoy the trip and come home to inherit the family business. Xiao Ying's father, Su Kai, spoke to her privately before walking over to me. He punched my shoulder lightly. "Kid, I won't be there to watch over you two. Out there. Just look after her, all right?" "Don't worry, Uncle Su," I said. "I'll take care of Xiao Ying." Su Kai paused, looking like he suddenly regretted his decision. I could see the thought crossing his mind. Wait, did I just give this pig permission to go after my cabbage? My own parents held my hands, their eyes full of hope. "We believe in you, son. If you succeed, we'll be the happiest parents in the world. I won't let anything stop me, I promised." We climbed into the carriage, and the driver snapped the whip. We were off. As soon as we settled in, Hu Lai tore open a bag and dumped a pile of nuts and snacks onto the seat. "Eat up. Once we're full, we sleep. We'll be there by the time we wake up." "Is that why you're so fat?" I joked. We laughed and started snacking. Hu Lai had traveled this road a dozen times, so he fell asleep almost immediately. Xiao Ying and I kept our faces pressed to the window, watching the world go by. Everything was new to us. Xiao Ying sat close to me. We were so familiar with each other that she didn't need to say anything for me to know what she was thinking. But as she looked at me, I could tell she noticed something different. I wasn't the same guy she grew up with anymore. My aura had changed. It wasn't just that my skin looked better or that I'd become more handsome. There was something else. A strange, indescribable aura radiated from me, something fresh and comforting. The closer Xiao Ying sat, the more she felt it. But the feeling wasn't consistent. As we sat together in the carriage, the scent was faint, almost teasing. It was nothing like that day by the fence when she'd handed me those dates. Back then, the refreshing, mind-clearing energy coming off me had been overwhelming. I didn't notice any of this, of course. I was too close to the situation to see it. but Xiaoying watched me with sharp eyes. The truth was simple, though I hadn't realized it yet. At the fence, I had the apocalypse bead tucked against my skin. Now, in the carriage, it was tucked away inside my mechanical storage ring. That mysterious energy was leaking from the bead itself. By evening, the carriage finally pulled into the registration center for the Cloud Sea sect. The Cloud Sea sect and the White Peak sect were both branches of the powerful White Cloud sect. In the Beiping continent, you couldn't just call yourself a major sect. You needed a nascent soul expert to back you up. To be a branch sect, like Cloud Sea, you needed at least one golden core cultivator. The current sect master, Hai Qing, was a golden core expert, though he spent most of his time in seclusion. The real power rested with the elders, mostly Foundation establishment cultivators. They controlled everything: the spirit stones, the herbs, the pills, and the magical beasts. Under them were the managers, senior inner disciples who handled the day-to-day grind. Then there were the outer disciples. They were basically glorified laborers. They planted herbs, fed the beasts, scrubbed floors, and hauled water. If Xiaoying, Hulai, and I did well in the trials, we might become inner disciples. If we were just okay, we'd be stuck doing chores as outer disciples. And if we failed, we'd be sent home with nothing. Hulai pumped his fist, looking smug. This selection is mine. I'm a lock. You two better work hard if you want to keep up with me. I couldn't help but laugh. Hulai, it's still daylight. It's a bit early to be dreaming, don't you think? Xiaoying giggled, the tension finally leaving her shoulders. She joked that our village was a breeding ground for troublemakers. If the two of us actually made it in, the cultivation world wouldn't know what hit it. But I knew the reality. Cultivation required 4 things: wealth, companions, methods, and location. Wealth came first. I needed spirit stones, and with the apocalypse bead, I had a feeling I could get them. I just needed to test my theories. Spirit stones were the currency of this world. They were ranked by quality: low, mid, high, and top grade. There were even legends of exquisite stones, though even the strongest masters rarely saw them. It wasn't just about how much energy they held, it was about purity. A high-grade stone could make you cultivate 100 times faster than a low-grade one. Then there were the scrap stones. These were the leftovers from the mines, filled with so many impurities they were practically toxic. Using them was like slow-acting poison. The toxins would build up in your body, blocking your meridians and killing your potential. Most young cultivators didn't know this, but the elders did. They threw the scrap stones into herb gardens to slightly boost the air or just left them in the mines to rot. No one wanted them. They were worse than useless. I wondered, though, could these discarded scraps ever find a second life? The registration booth was in the middle of Pingan City Square. It was easy to spot. 2 young disciples in silver robes sat behind a wide stone table. Their collars and sleeves were embroidered with golden clouds that shimmered in the setting sun. These were official inner disciples, Zhou Qingqing and Zhang Dahai. How many have signed up, junior sister? Zhang Dahai asked. 46, Zhou Qingqing replied, checking the scroll. That's way more than last year. The competition is going to be brutal. Zhang Dahai sighed. Even the ones who make it as outer disciples are just chasing a ghost. Most will spend their lives doing manual labor, hoping for a miracle or a lucky break that will never come. I wonder if they'll still be smiling when they're hauling water every morning. I wonder if they'll regret it later, Zhou Qingqing said, her voice light. Zhang Dahai just laughed. He reminded her that we were all the same once. We were overjoyed just to be picked, even though it meant 3 years of back-breaking manual labor as servants. But we survived. We eventually became inner disciples under the 9th elder. Now, we finally have a real future in cultivation. As long as there is even a sliver of hope, people will fight for it. There is no time for regret. Zhou Qingqing thought back to her own selection day and smiled. That was when we walked up. Hulai was in the lead, grinning like a salesman. I followed behind him, buried under 4 or 5 heavy bags. Most of them were his, of course. One was for Su Ying. She walked beside us, carrying only a small cloth bundle, looking sharp and full of energy. We were finally here for the Cloud Sea sect selection. Hulai didn't waste a second. He bowed so low he nearly hit the dirt. Greetings, immortal masters, he chirped. Honestly, if the sect didn't take him, he would make a killing as a waiter. He started rambling about how hard they worked and how tired they must be. Then, he pulled out 2 boxes of imperial tea. It wasn't immortal tea, but it was the best the mortal world had to offer. He placed a box in front of each of them, his face full of fake humility. Zhang Dehai and Zhou Qingqing were amused. They told him they were only responsible for registration, not the actual selection. If he was trying to bribe his way in, he was wasting his time. They even joked about whether they looked old enough to be called immortal masters. Hulai didn't miss a beat. He started calling them senior brother and senior sister instead. He told them that even a smile from such fair and just people was worth the gift. His flattery was shameless, but it worked. The tension broke, and everyone started laughing. "You talk like you're already part of the sect, Hulai," I muttered. He just grinned at me. He told me that if the examiners were as nice as these two, he had total confidence. We signed our names. As soon as I stepped forward to the table, the atmosphere changed. Zhang Dehai and Zhou Qingqing both stiffened. They felt something. It was a faint, pure energy radiating from my body. To them, it felt like the pulse of a spirit stone, but clearer. It was closer to the mid-grade stones they had only seen their master handle once. Zhang Dehai was at the 8th level of qi condensation, and Zhou Qingqing was at the 7th. If they had been any weaker, they might not have noticed it at all. "Little brother," Zhang Dehai asked, his eyes narrowing, "are you carrying spirit stones? Or do you have internal energy?" I looked at him, completely confused. I told him I'd heard of spirit stones, but had never actually seen one. I didn't know what he meant by energy. Before I met old man Jiayu, I was just a normal kid from a mountain village. Zhang Dehai watched my reaction. He could tell I wasn't lying. He dropped the subject, but I saw him burn my name into his memory. He was going to keep a close eye on me during the tests. Hulai, ever the opportunist, walked behind Zhang Dehai and started massaging his shoulders. Zhang Dehai didn't stop him. He actually seemed to enjoy it. He decided to give us some free advice. The selection would start in 2 days at Cloud Sea City. He told us that while talent and physical foundation were the main priorities, the sect also looked for willpower, character, and even luck. "Talent makes cultivation faster," he explained. "But there are plenty of people with average roots who rise to the top through sheer hard work. Then there are the lucky ones who find secret treasures and soar overnight." He told us that even if we failed the standard tests, there was still hope. The Foundation establishment elders had the power to pick 1 or 2 disciples personally if they saw something they liked. "Don't give up until the very last second," he warned us. "You only need to pass 1 criteria to be recruited." We all bowed deeply. We really appreciated his honesty. He was a good man. I found myself wishing he really was my senior brother. The sun was starting to set. Zhou Qingqing pointed to a building across the square called the Hongfeng Inn. The sect had already booked 2 massive rooms for the applicants, 1 for boys and 1 for girls. They told us to rest there for the night and that we would head to Cloud Sea City in the morning. We thanked them and headed over. Hulai was actually annoyed that I had started calling Zhou Qingqing's senior sister before he could. When Hulai and I stepped into the men's quarters, the mood was sour. There were about 20 guys in there already. Most were around our age, but some looked like grown men. In the center of the room, the best and most spacious beds had been claimed. A group of 5 or 6 teenagers were lounging there, led by a guy in expensive silk robes who looked about 18. They were staring us down, their eyes cold and arrogant. The rest of the applicants were huddled together on the tiny, cramped mats near the door. There wasn't enough room for everyone to even lie down. It was obvious what was happening. The rich kid and his thugs were bullying everyone else to keep the best spots for themselves. Normally, I would have just ignored it. I could sleep on the floor if I had to. But the way they were looking at us told me they weren't planning on letting us sleep at all. This wasn't just about a place to sleep. Tomorrow's disciple selection was everything. If I didn't rest, I wouldn't be at my best. I couldn't afford to fail. I realized I actually had to fight for this. Hulai stepped forward first. He was a smart kid. He reached into his bag and pulled out a handful of mountain snacks and dried fruit. He walked right up to the leader in the silk robes and laid them out on his bed. Then, he pulled out a fancy folding fan and tossed it over. Hulai knew exactly what he was doing. Guys like this loved acting like sophisticated scholars. Sure enough, The silk-robed teen caught the fan, snapped it open, and gave it a few arrogant shakes. A smug smile crept onto his face. "You're a sharp one, fatty," the teen said, pointing his fan at a decent spot. "You can sleep there." I didn't like the guy, but Hulai had already done the hard work of smoothing things over. I started to follow him toward the bed. "Hold on." The teen jumped down and blocked my path. His eyes narrowed as he looked me up and down. "The fat one can stay. You. Not yet. Where's my tribute?" I stared him right in the eyes. I had spent my life hunting in the mountains, wrestling wild animals, and surviving scrapes that would make a city kid cry. My body was tough, and after the marrow cleansing from the apocalypse bead, I felt a new surge of vitality in my veins. My senses were sharper than ever. Besides, if I got hurt, I had a literal healing treasure in my pocket. "I only give tribute to my parents," I said firmly. "You haven't earned the right." The room went silent. The teen's face twisted with rage. "You little brat. You think you're tough?" "I'm not looking for trouble either," a voice called out from the back. A sturdy-looking boy named Ma Tao stepped out from the crowd and stood beside me. He had been stewing in anger at the bullying, and seeing me stand up gave him the courage to join in. Sometimes people just need someone else to take the first step so they don't feel alone. "Get him," the silk-robed teen barked. He wasn't just a loudmouth, he was mean. He lunged forward, throwing a heavy right hook at my nose. I leaned left, feeling the wind of his fist brush past my cheek. I didn't just dodge, though. I grabbed his extended arm, stepped behind his lead leg, and pulled. He had put too much weight into the punch. With my extra tug and the trip, he went flying. He slammed face first into the wooden floor. When he looked up, his nose was gushing blood. His lackeys tried to rush in, but Ma Tao and Hulai blocked them. They started shoving and shouting, keeping the subordinates busy while I dealt with the leader. The teen scrambled up, his face smeared with blood. He grabbed a heavy wooden stool and hurled it at me. I didn't have time to move, so I crossed my arms to block it. The impact stung like fire, but I stayed on my feet. He followed the stool with a kick aimed at my stomach. I was faster. I jammed my foot into his inner shin, knocking his leg off course. He lost his balance again and tumbled toward me. I stepped aside, letting him crash back onto the floor. "Go get Wang Jin," he screamed as he hit the ground. One of his cronies immediately bolted out the door. Hulai's face went pale. He realized we were in over our heads and ran out too, probably looking for the senior brothers from the square. I realized I had to end this fast. If this Wang Jin guy showed up, I'd be outnumbered. I rushed the teen and landed 2 quick punches on his back. He rolled over, grabbed the stool again, and swung it wildly. I backed off, waiting for the right moment. As the stool swung past my chest, and his momentum stalled, I stepped inside his guard. I put everything I had into a punch straight to his chest. He flew backward, but he still wouldn't let go of that stool. He was stubborn and vicious. He stood up one more time and threw the stool at my head with everything he had. I timed it perfectly. I deflected his wrist with my right hand and batted the stool away with my left. Then I lunged, driving my shoulder into his gut and tackling him to the floor. I pinned him down and landed a solid blow to his face. Blood sprayed everywhere. He tried to push me off, but I was too heavy. "Stop!" A voice thundered through the room. Before I could blink, a blur of white appeared. A hand gripped my wrist like a vice and lifted me clean off the guy. I couldn't move an inch. "Brother Wang Jin," the teen sobbed, looking for sympathy. The newcomer was a young man in the white robes of a Cloud Sea inner disciple. He looked at the bloody mess on the floor and then at me. I felt a sink in my stomach. This guy was a real cultivator. Just then, Zhang Dahai and Zhou Qingqing walked in, followed by a breathless Hulai. "Wang Jin, you're back," Zhang Dahai said, looking at the scene. He didn't seem angry. He just handed over a scroll. "Here's the list of applicants. I'll make a copy for you later." Wang Jin let go of my arm. He realized he couldn't bully me with the other seniors watching, especially since his cousin, the kid in the silk robes, was the one who started it. "Sorry for the trouble," Wang Jin said smoothly, his voice devoid of emotion. "Just a little disagreement between the kids. I've settled it. They should get some rest." He acted like it was nothing, but the look he gave me told a different story. He wasn't going to forget this. Still, for now, the fight was over. We had our beds. That's how it goes, Zhang Dehai said, breaking the tension. Back when we joined the sect, we had a few scraps in the dueling arena too. Those fights were way bloodier than what these two kids managed today. He turned to the rest of the group. Everyone, get some rest. We leave tomorrow morning. Wang Jin didn't waste any time. He looked at the kid in the silk robes, his cousin, Wang Yin. Come with me to treat those wounds. You'll sleep in my room tonight. Wang Jin walked out without another word, and Wang Yin scurried after him like a kicked puppy. Once they were gone, Zhang Dehai walked over to me. Kid, I didn't expect you to have moves like that, he said, a hint of a smile on his face. I thought I'd be picking your teeth off the floor. Here, take this. He tossed me a small jade bottle. I caught it with one hand. It's basic grass balm, he explained. Good for light injuries. Rub it on tonight. Thanks, senior brother, I replied. I appreciated the gesture. Hulai, my chubby friend, waddled over immediately. Are you hurt bad? You should be asking Wang Yin that. I laughed, trying to keep him from worrying. I'm fine. I wasn't lying. My hands and forearms were bruised and swollen from blocking that wooden stool, but I knew it wasn't serious. Besides, I had the apocalypse bead. A little swelling was nothing a few minutes of healing couldn't fix. With Wang Yin gone, his little gang lost their nerve. They huddled in a corner to sleep, leaving the rest of the beds to us. Because I'd won the fight, the other kids gave me a wide berth. Some looked at me with respect, others looked at me with fear. I didn't mind. It meant I got the most spacious spot in the room. Hulai fell asleep the second his head hit the pillow. The guy could sleep through a thunderstorm. I waited until the room was filled with the sound of steady breathing before I moved. I reached into my mechanical storage ring and pulled out the apocalypse bead. I held it tightly between my palms. A cool, refreshing sensation washed over my arms instantly. The throbbing pain began to fade. Usually, it took about 15 minutes for the bead to work its magic. But this time, the pain vanished in seconds. I rubbed my arms. The swelling was gone. My skin felt perfect. Was the bead getting faster? Or did the healing time depend on how bad the injury was? I didn't have the answers yet, so I tucked the bead back into the ring and closed my eyes. I woke up before dawn. Lately, my sleep had been incredibly deep. Even a few hours left me feeling like I could sprint up a mountain. Beside me, Hulai was snoring, a bit of drool escaping the corner of his mouth. I stepped outside the inn. The morning air was crisp. In the middle of the square, I saw a figure sitting cross-legged in white robes. It was Zhang Dehai. He was practicing his breathing, absorbing the essence of the world. I walked over quietly, not wanting to disturb him. He didn't open his eyes until he finished his cycle. Morning is the best time, he said softly. The balance between yin and yang is perfect. Most of us are just ordinary people without God-tier talent, Yuan Shao. If you want to walk the path of cultivation, remember this. Hard work makes up for what you lack. He was only at the 8th level of chi refining, but his words hit home. Geniuses might start fast, but the persistent ones go the distance. The Cloud Sea sect isn't a paradise, he continued, looking out at the horizon. Wherever there are people, there is conflict. If you make it in, keep your head down. Don't brag. A good sprout can be stepped on before it grows. But once you're strong enough, problems solve themselves. He looked at me. When you're a low-level cultivator, your enemies are low-level. But when you become a powerhouse, those old enemies don't even exist to you anymore. They won't dare challenge you. They might even try to be your friend. Your past mistakes become nothing more than stories for a dinner party. Keep that in mind. I will. Thank you, senior brother, I said, truly grateful for the advice. Go wake the others, he said, standing up. Breakfast, then we head to Cloud Sea City. Half an hour later, 51 kids were gathered in the square. Only one person was missing, Wang Yin. I figured he was too embarrassed to show his face after I'd rearranged it yesterday. Just as Zhang Dehai was about to go look for him, Wang Jin appeared, leading his cousin out. Wang Yin's face was a mess of bandages. My master sent word, Wang Jin called out. He wants me back early. I'll take Wang Yin with me on my mount. I'll drop him off at the testing grounds myself. Fine by me, Zhang Dehai replied. Wang Jin pulled a small bag from his belt and patted it. With a flash of light, a massive black eagle appeared. It was huge, easily big enough to carry 5 or 6 people. The kids gasped in awe. Wang Jin and his cousin hopped onto the eagle's back, gripped its feathers, and took off. With one powerful flap of its wings, the beast soared into the sky and vanished. That's a spirit beast, Zhang Dehai explained. Wang Jin's master is the fourth elder, who runs the sect's stables. Most of his disciples get one. Zhang Dehai didn't have an eagle, but he had something else. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small wooden toy boat. He tossed it into the air. The boat grew instantly, expanding until it was 60 feet long and 10 feet wide. It hovered silently above the ground. A flying vessel, the kids screamed, rushing toward it. They scrambled onto the deck, touching the railings and staring at the clouds. This was real magic. Sit down and hold on, Zhou Qingqing warned. We're leaving. Zhang Dehai took out a few glowing white crystals and slotted them into the front of the ship. The deck hummed beneath my feet. With a sudden surge of power, the ground dropped away. We were flying. A transparent shield shimmered into existence, wrapping around the flying vessel like a bubble. We began to rise slowly. Once we hit a certain altitude, the ship jolted forward, slicing through the air with sudden speed. Zhang Dehai pulled out another small white crystal. He held it up for all of us to see. This is a low-grade spirit stone, he explained. Most magical tools and treasures need these to run. You'll need them for your daily cultivation, too. They provide the spiritual energy your body craves. He looked at us, his expression serious. If you manage to become outer sect disciples, you'll receive one of these every 2 months. If you're lucky enough to make it into the inner sect, you'll get 3 every single month. The kids around me whispered in excitement. That sounded like a fortune. The sect also offers missions, Zhang Dehai continued. Complete them well, and you get extra stones. And of course, if you please your master, they might toss a few your way as a reward. That part just comes down to luck. I watched the crystal glow in his hand. It wasn't just a battery, it was money. In the world of cultivators, these stones were the silver and gold. You used them to buy weapons, secret manuals, and rare resources. If I wanted to survive and grow strong, I needed to figure out how to get my hands on a lot of them. Spirit stones aren't everything, Zhang Dehai said. But without them, you can't do anything. He glanced at Hu Lai, the chubby kid next to me. Little fatty, if you ever get into business, I think you'd be good at it. Zhang Dehai was a kind soul. We weren't even official disciples yet, but he was happy to teach us the basics. He told us that the white stones were just the bottom tier. Mid-grade stones were green and packed far more energy. High-grade stones were blue. He'd only seen one once at a major ceremony in the Great White Cloud sect. As for top-grade purple stones, or the legendary orange ones, he shook his head. Those are myths found only in ancient records. I've never seen a real one. They are treasures you find by fate, not by looking. He leaned back, his eyes scanning all of us. The world is vast. Everyone has their own destiny. The legends of our world were all darlings of heaven, blessed with opportunities others couldn't dream of. Then his voice dropped an octave, becoming firm. But listen well. Everyone has secrets. Not envying others' luck and not prying into their secrets. That is the bottom line. Use your own luck well, and guard your own secrets. That is the duty of a cultivator. His gaze lingered on me for a second longer than the others. My heart skipped a beat. Did he know? Did he see the apocalypse bead? I forced myself to stay calm. He didn't look suspicious, just observant. He seemed like a decent man, and I didn't sense any malice. Zhang Dehai walked to the front of the ship and closed his eyes to rest. I looked out at the passing clouds, thinking about what he said. A sect's survival depended on the geniuses it produced. If a single powerhouse rose from the ranks, the entire sect would flourish for 1,000 years. But the Cloud Sea sect had been struggling lately. They hadn't found any true geniuses in a decade, and they were falling behind their rivals, the White Peak sect. That was why they had opened the gates so wide this year. They were desperate. They wanted to bring in as many candidates as possible, hoping to find a hidden gem among the dirt. The competition was going to be brutal. We weren't heading to the main sect mountain yet. Our destination was Cloud Sea City, the site of the old sect ruins. 500 years ago, the first sect master built the foundation there because of a massive spirit stone mine. But after centuries of digging, the mine ran dry. The spiritual energy faded, making it a poor place for cultivation. As the energy vanished, the town grew. It swallowed the old sect grounds, turning into a massive metropolis. 100 years ago, the sect moved deep into the southern mountains where new mines were discovered. They kept the old site as a recruitment hub and a way to stay connected to the mortal world. It kept the Cloud Sea brand alive in the hearts of the people. The vessel wasn't fast. It was built for safety, not racing. But eventually, a massive shadow appeared on the horizon. It was a city so large I couldn't see where it ended. Hulai, Xiaoying, and I crowded the edge of the ship, staring down. My breath caught in my throat. From this height, the streets looked like a complex web of veins. 2 rivers cut through the center, winding away into the distance. Rows of houses blurred past beneath us, and the people on the streets were nothing more than tiny black dots. Even Hulai, who had traveled more than any of us, stood there with his mouth hanging open. I looked straight ahead. The ship was aiming directly for the heart of the ancient city. Our target was a cluster of mountains nestled within the city limits. 10 peaks linked together like a sleeping dragon, their slopes dotted with ancient buildings. As Zhang Dehai lowered the floating vessel, the details came into focus. We were heading toward a towering mountain gate, the entrance to the original Cloud Sea sect. This place was chosen for a reason. Beyond using the old facilities, the sect wanted to put on a show for the citizens of Cloud Sea City. They wanted the world to see their power. Thousands of locals gathered to watch the selection process, their eyes filled with envy. Only the chosen few would be sent to the new southern headquarters. The rest would be sent back to their hometowns to live out their ordinary lives. If you want to stay, seize this chance, Zhang Dehai shouted over the wind. Are you ready? The ship glided past the gates and touched down at a massive plaza near the foot of the mountain. Other flying vessels were already parked there, their decks empty. The other recruitment teams had beaten us back. Zhang Dehai and Zhou Qingqing gathered us in the center of the plaza before heading off to report to the sect elders. Before leaving, Zhang Dehai pulled me, Xiaoying, and Hulai aside. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and serious. Focus on the test. If you all pass, great. But if any of you fail, don't leave. Wait for me. I'll take you to see my master. He wouldn't tell us why, but the sincerity in his eyes was unmistakable. We nodded, promising to wait. I looked toward the front of the plaza. A row of high-ranking seats was occupied by men and women in flowing robes, the elders of Cloud Sea. One old man in black caught my eye. On the table in front of him sat a small, eagle-like spirit insect. It tilted its head, watching the crowd with sharp eyes while crunching on a piece of white spirit stone like it was a common snack. My heart raced. This world was full of wonders I had never imagined. In front of the elders stood several separate platforms, each holding strange objects I didn't recognize. A middle-aged Taoist with an ethereal aura stepped forward. The selection begins now, he announced. His voice carried across the plaza without effort. The first test measures your meridian flow and circulation speed. He explained that cultivation was based on circulating spiritual energy through the body to temper the flesh. If your meridians were blocked, you were a dead end. This was the threshold. Pass, and you became an outer sect disciple with a chance to take the advanced tests. Fail, and you were finished. No second chances. On each platform sat a pair of matching tools called spirit stream hammers. Hold one in each hand, the Taoist directed. The right hammer will release a burst of energy. It will travel through your body and return to the left hammer. The time it takes determines your talent. The orb on the left hammer would glow. Black meant blocked. Yellow meant clear. Orange meant exceptional. Yellow and orange stayed. Black went home. Since our ship arrived last, we were at the back of the line. I watched the first boy walk up. He grabbed the hammers and immediately began to shake. A cry of pain escaped his lips. The energy was struggling to force its way through his clogged veins. A moment later, the orb glowed a dull, flat black. Unqualified. Next, the Taoist said. He didn't even look up. He had seen this 1,000 times. One by one, kids walked up. One by one, the orbs turned black. Xiaoying and Hulai were pale, their hands trembling. This was brutal. It wasn't about effort. It was about the body you were born with. But I wasn't as nervous. I remembered what old man Jiayu had told me. The apocalypse bead had already performed a marrow cleansing on my body. I felt lighter, sharper, and more vibrant than ever before. My meridians were wide open. I knew I would pass, but I worried for my friends. I couldn't use the bead to help them, not yet. An ordinary man carrying a treasure is like a target painted on his back. If the Heavenly Palace found out I had the bead, they wouldn't just kill me. They would burn everything I loved to the ground. Only Jiayu and my parents knew about the bead. Jiayu had given it to me, and my parents didn't understand its true value. They'd probably forget about it if no one mentioned it again. I had to keep it that way. I would help my friends once I was strong enough to protect us all. For now, I just had to survive the test. Once I reached a high enough level of power, I wouldn't have to worry so much. I could help my friends then. But for now, the testing continued. Black. Unqualified. Next. The Taoist's voice was a rhythmic, soul-crushing hammer. One by one, kids walked away from the platform with heavy hearts and bloodshot eyes. Some were on the verge of tears. I felt for them. Back home, their parents had high expectations. Some had probably bragged to the whole village. Going back now would be a crushing humiliation. Finally, the 16th child stepped up. She was a girl, maybe 10 years old, with features as delicate as a carved jade doll. When she gripped the hammers, the orbs didn't turn black. They glowed a steady, clear yellow. Yellow. Qualified. Next, the girl was led to a resting area. Anyone who passed this first stage was guaranteed a spot as an outer sect disciple. For the first time, the middle-aged Taoist actually showed a flicker of emotion. He looked relieved. The sect had increased the number of candidates this year because they were desperate. A sect is only as strong as its disciples. Without fresh talent to eventually protect the legacy or make a name for the school in the wider world, the sect would simply wither away. Genius is rare. When the elders find someone whose talent fits their specific techniques, they'll do anything to bring them in. But finding that spark is like looking for a needle in a vast ocean. By the time the first 20 groups finished, the numbers were grim. Out of nearly 1,000 kids, only 53 had passed. The elimination rate was brutal. Finally, it was our turn. Our group, led by Zhang Dahai, was the last to arrive at the plaza, so we were the last to be tested. Wang Yin pushed his way to the front of our line. I noticed the bruises on his face were almost gone. His brother, Wang Jin, must have given him some high-grade medicinal paste. Wang Yin looked confident. He stepped up and grabbed the hammers. They immediately glowed yellow. He let out a smug laugh. He had probably used a spirit stone to prep his body beforehand, but he clearly had some natural talent too. He had secured his spot as an outer disciple. As he walked off the stage, he raised an eyebrow at me in a silent, arrogant challenge. Wang Yin. Yellow. Qualified. Next. The fact that someone from Ping'an County passed energized the rest of the group. But the hope didn't last long. The next few kids were all black. Then, Ma Tao stepped up. The hammers glowed yellow again. He was ecstatic, giving us a thumbs up as he headed to the resting area. Zhang Dahai and Zhou Qingning looked pleased. Their trip to Ping'an hadn't been a waste. Zhang Dahai seemed thoughtful. He realized Ma Tao was from a village near Immortal Mountain, the same general area where Xiaoying, Hu Lai, and I lived. Then came the fat little guy, Hu Lai. He was muttering prayers under his breath, begging every god he knew. He didn't want to go home and inherit the family business. He wanted immortality. He grabbed the hammers, and a moment later, yellow. He started shaking with excitement. He promised the gods he'd burn the best incense for them the moment he got home. Xiaoying was next. He looked nervous, but when his hands touched the metal, the yellow glow appeared instantly. 2 in a row. Zhang Dahai's expression shifted from relief to deep suspicion. Ma Tao, Hu Lai, and Xiaoying were all from the base of Immortal Mountain. Was there a secret hidden in that place? Finally, it was my turn. With my friends safe, the weight on my chest vanished. I wasn't worried. I trusted old man Jiayu. My body had been purified by the apocalypse bead. I was a pure and flawless vessel now. If I couldn't pass, nobody could. Zhang Dahai watched me intently. He was wondering if the Immortal Mountain streak would continue. I stepped up and gripped the handles. I felt a faint current of energy, the spiritual flow the Taoist mentioned, enter my right hand. It moved through my meridians like a cool breeze. There was no pain, no resistance. My body was so hungry for energy that I actually absorbed more than half of the flow as it passed through me. Even with the leftover energy, the reaction was instantaneous. The orbs didn't turn yellow. They erupted into a brilliant, vibrant orange. The plaza went silent for a heartbeat before exploding into a roar of shock. Even the lazy elders sitting at the high table sat bolt upright. Their eyes locked onto me, glowing with sudden intensity. It had been hundreds of years since these hammers had turned orange. They exchanged quick, meaningful looks and nodded to one another, though they remained silent. The middle-aged Taoist clapped me on the shoulder, a genuine grin on his face. Good lad. Very impressive. Hu Lai and Xiaoying were cheering. Wang Yin, however, looked like he'd swallowed a fly. He finally realized why he couldn't beat me in a fight the night before. Zhang Dehai was stunned. His theory was confirmed. For kids from the same tiny corner of the world had passed, and one was a once-in-a-century genius. He looked toward the horizon, toward Immortal Mountain. He decided then and there that he would visit that mountain one day. There was a destiny there, and he wanted a piece of it. The 58 candidates who passed the first test, the Taoist shouted, stepped forward. We all moved toward the second table. The middle-aged Taoist cleared his throat to explain the next phase. He told us that the first test measured how fast spiritual energy flowed through our meridians. This second test was its direct successor. It was designed to measure how much of that energy our bodies actually kept. When that energy cycled through you, the Taoist said, your body naturally absorbed some of it. Since this is your first time touching spiritual energy, the amount you retained shows your compatibility with it. This is vital. In the future, you must absorb as much as possible and store it deep within. That is how you fuel your techniques. He pointed to a strange object on the table. It was a tall pillar known as the Spirit Testing Column, a treasure of the Cloud Sea sect. He explained that if the initial flow of energy was a perfect 10, the column would show what percentage remained in our bodies. There are 10 stars on this column, he continued. 1 star means you absorbed 10%. 10 stars mean a perfect 100. Of course, 10 stars is purely theoretical. It's impossible. Energy is always lost through movement or evaporation through the skin. If you hit 5 stars, you are excellent. Anyone with 5 stars or more will be accepted directly as an inner disciple. A heavy silence fell over the plaza. Everyone craned their necks, desperate to see who would make the cut. I stayed in line with the other 57 candidates. The testing began. It was a brutal reality check. Most of the candidates who had passed the first round were now faltering. I watched as the column lit up with only 1, 2, or 3 stars. These kids were destined for the outer sect, relegated to manual labor while they struggled to cultivate. Then, a girl named Murong Shue stepped up. She looked like a delicate porcelain doll. When she pressed her hand to the base, the column surged. 6 stars. The Taoist's eyebrows shot up. Are you from the Murong clan in Songnan? She nodded silently. It made sense. Her family was an old cultivation lineage. Even if they had declined lately, they still knew how to prep their children for this moment. Then came Wang Yin. He walked up with a smirk that set my teeth on edge. I knew he had an edge. His brother, Wang Jin, was already an inner disciple. Wang Jin must have used his own energy to clear Wang Yin's meridians and taught him some secret breathing tricks beforehand. It was cheating, in a way, but in this world, connections were just another form of strength. The column lit up. 6 stars. My name is Wang Yin, he shouted, basking in the glory. He was officially an inner disciple. Ma Tao went next and hit 4 stars. He looked disappointed, but he wasn't out. He could still work his way up from the outer sect. Even my friend, Hu Lai, managed 4 stars. The little fatty sighed with relief. He whispered to me that at least he didn't have to go home and inherit the family business. He was an optimist. He figured he could charm his way into the inner sect in a few years anyway. Xiaoying surprised everyone. She hit 5 stars. Female disciples with that kind of talent were rare in the Cloud Sea sect. She was in. Finally, it was my turn. I remembered how that cool breeze had felt inside me. By the time the energy reached my left hand during the first test, there was barely anything left. I knew I had soaked up almost all of it. I stepped up to the pillar. The crowd went quiet. I pressed my palm onto the jade base. The column didn't just light up. It screamed. 1 star, 5, 8, and then all 10 stars erupted in a blinding glow. The Taoist's calm face shattered. 10 stars. That's impossible. Is the column broken? If I had absorbed every single drop, no energy would have been left to trigger the hammers in the first test. But I had triggered them. The math didn't add up. Wang Yin's eyes looked like they were going to pop out of his skull. He looked terrified. Then that terror turned into a dark, murderous envy. I could see him thinking. We were both still mortals. If he trained harder, or if he found a way to get rid of me quietly with his brother's help, my talent wouldn't matter. Up on the high stage, the elders were buzzing. Even these old men, who had lived for centuries, couldn't absorb 10 stars. I felt a cold gaze on my back. It was the 4th elder, the man in black with the stone owl on his shoulder. His eyes narrowed. He wasn't just impressed, he was suspicious. He was wondering if I was hiding a spiritual treasure on my person, something that was feeding the column extra energy. I stood there, the center of attention, realizing that my perfect result had just put a massive target on my back. I stood there in the silence, feeling the weight of 100 stares. I knew I had to find out the truth once I was officially inside the sect. Up on the high stage, the 4th elder, Tian Cho, was watching me with a dark intensity. He wasn't a genius. He had lucked his way into the foundation establishment stage years ago, but his cultivation had hit a dead end. He was stuck at the early level, likely the weakest elder in the entire Cloud Sea sect. Because of that, he lived in a constant state of paranoia. If a new genius rose up and reached foundation establishment, would he lose his seat? Would they take away his control over the spirit beast garden? Since he couldn't grow his own power through training, he looked for shortcuts. Seeing the 10 stars on the pillar, he didn't see a talented kid, he saw a treasure. He was convinced I was carrying some legendary artifact that had tricked the test. He couldn't move against me openly, but I saw the sinister glint in his eyes as he began to plot in the shadows. To be honest, I was just as confused as everyone else. If I had absorbed 90% of the energy, I could understand it. I remembered feeling that tiny bit of leftover chi in my left hand during the first test. But 100%? That was impossible. Unless that energy didn't come from the test at all. It hit me. The pillar wasn't just measuring what I had absorbed. It was reacting to the chi already inside my body. If the pillar had more stars, 13, 18, 20, it probably would have lit those up too. My internal reserves were massive compared to the tiny drop they had sent through me. Where did it all come from? I didn't know for sure, but I had a prime suspect, the apocalypse bead. I had been carrying it against my skin for so long, and I still didn't understand the faint mist swirling around it. Was that mist pure chi? Had I been soaking it up in my sleep without even realizing it? I made a silent vow to find a safe, secluded spot as soon as possible to study the bead and master its secrets. I scanned the crowd and saw Wang Yin. He was fuming. I had already made an enemy of him, which meant I was also an enemy of his brother, Wang Jin, an established inner disciple. Wang Jin would have his own circle of friends and influence. Even worse, Wang Jin's master was that suspicious 4th elder. If those two started whispering lies about me in the elder's ear, my life in the sect would be a living hell. I decided right then to keep my head down. I needed to turtle for a while, lay low, boost my cultivation, and focus on survival. There's no point in having big dreams if you're dead. I felt a sudden prickle of intuition and glanced up at the 4th elder. He quickly jerked his gaze away, pretending to look elsewhere. My gut twisted. That man was dangerous. As I stood there, I realized how many enemies I already had, both seen and unseen. Once this selection ended, I decided I had to distance myself from the chubby kid, Zhang Dehai, and the others. If I stayed close to them, I'd just be dragging them into my mess. It was better for everyone if I walked alone for a bit. On the stage, the 9th elder, Zhou Tian, was looking quite pleased. He was the master of Zhang Dehai and Zhou Qingping, and they had already talked me up to him. He saw me as a prize. Earlier, when I hit the orange hammer, the elders had made a pact. Since I was a guaranteed inner disciple, no one was allowed to fight over me during my first year. The rules of the Cloud Sea sect were strict. Normal outer disciples had to serve for 3 years, practicing basic techniques on their own before they could compete for a spot in the inner sect. For people like me, who were pre-selected for the inner sect, we still had to do a year of labor service to toughen our spirits. We got better manuals and a monthly allowance of 3 low-grade spirit stones, but we still had to work. Usually, a master would look out for their inner disciple, giving them an easy job like managing other workers so they had more time to train. Some even kept their disciples in their own private courtyards. The sect used this year to see who could handle the loneliness, the hard work, and the inevitable backstabbing of the outer sect. It was a miniature version of the cruel cultivation world. If you couldn't survive the outer sect, you wouldn't survive the path to immortality. Because of my 10-star talent, the elders agreed to let me choose my own master after my year of service was up. The 9th elder figured he had the inside track since I was already friendly with his students. The middle-aged Taoist's voice broke through my thoughts. The second test is over. Morong Shui, Wang Yin, Su Ying, and Lin Yuan. You 4 have scored 5 stars or higher. You are officially recorded as inner disciples. He gestured toward the stage. The 4 of you, follow me to the second elder to register your details. He manages the sect's treasures and the archives for all inner disciples. I took a deep breath and stepped forward. My journey was finally starting, but the target on my back had never felt heavier. A serious-looking man with hair as white as snow sat in the main seat. This was the second elder. Despite his age, his skin glowed with a healthy luster, and his energy felt boundless. I realized then that high-level cultivators could use their power to keep their bodies from decaying. They stayed in peak condition while the rest of the world withered. The Taoist called us forward. Wang Yin, Morong Shui, Su Ying, and I formed a line to approach the second elder's table. To get there, we had to pass the 4th elder, Tianqiu. On the 4th elder's table sat a stone spirit eagle. It was a small, strange creature, currently gnawing on a low-grade spirit stone. As we walked by, the bird suddenly froze. It stopped eating and stood perfectly still, its tiny head rotating to follow us. Its beak twitched, sniffing the air aggressively. Wang Yin passed. Then Morong Shui and Su Ying. The 2 of them thought the bird was cute and reached out to pet it, but the eagle ignored them completely. It didn't even blink. Then, I stepped forward. The moment I reached the table, the stone spirit eagle lunged. It screeched and blurred through the air, landing right on my shoulder. I flinched as it began frantically sniffing my neck, my face, and my collar. It was relentless. "Get back here," the 4th elder barked. The eagle glanced at him for a split second, then went right back to burrowing its beak into my clothes. I was stunned. I didn't know what it wanted. The 4th elder's eyes narrowed. I could see the gears turning in his head. He knew exactly what was happening. Stone spirit eagles aren't fighters. They are trackers. They are born with an obsession for spiritual energy. Sects use them to find spirit stone mines or hidden treasures buried deep underground. They are rare, expensive to feed, and incredibly hard to breed. Right now, this eagle was ignoring its meal because it smelled something better on me. Much better. It looked intoxicated, rubbing its head against my skin with a look of pure bliss. I felt a chill run down my spine. The 4th elder was staring at me now, and it wasn't a friendly look. He was a man stuck at the peak of the chi condensation stage, desperate for a breakthrough. To him, I wasn't a student anymore. I was a walking treasure chest. He probably thought I had a high-grade spirit stone or a powerful artifact hidden in my robes. I had to get this bird off me. I grabbed the eagle with both hands, feeling its tiny talons snagging and tearing my fabric. With a firm tug, I pulled it away and set it back on the 4th elder's table. I even picked up its discarded spirit stone and tucked it back into its claws. "Maybe we'll meet again later," I muttered, patting its head to calm it down. "We're in the same sect now, right?" I didn't wait for an answer. I hurried toward the second elder to register. Behind me, I heard the eagle try to jump again, followed by a sharp thwack as the 4th elder hit the table with a cane. The bird stayed put, but it hissed and threw its spirit stone onto the floor in a fit of rage. It didn't want the scrap anymore. It wanted what I had. I glanced back and caught the 4th elder's eyes. They were filled with naked greed. I knew right then that as soon as I was out of the public eye, he would come for me. Now for the third and final test, the middle-aged Taoist announced, his voice booming across the plaza. "We are sending you into an abandoned spirit stone mine." He explained that the mine, located at the edge of the Cloud Sea sect's old grounds, had been picked clean 100 years ago. It takes tens of thousands of years for spirit stones to form, so finding anything new was impossible. However, the sect wanted to see if we could find the scraps the old miners had missed. "Your task is simple," the Taoist said. "Find as many low-grade spirit stones as possible. Use any method you want. Work alone or in teams. We don't care about the process, only the results." Then came the kicker. "Competition and conflict are allowed," he added coldly. "You may injure each other, but you are forbidden from killing. Anyone who takes a life will be severely punished and expelled." There were 58 of us left. The top 3 collectors would earn a spot in the inner sect. Since I was already pre-selected, if I made the top 3, I'd get a bonus of 3 spirit stones, and my spot would pass to the next person in line. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The rules were clear. Fighting, stealing, and scheming were all legal. This wasn't a test of mining. It was a test of survival. It was our first real taste of the cruelty of the cultivation world. I looked over at Wang Yin. He was already staring at me. He flashed a dark, jagged smile and ran a thumb across his throat. He wouldn't kill me. He wanted to join the sect too badly to risk expulsion, but he was going to make me bleed. I made a quick decision. I couldn't stay with Su Ying or the others. If I stayed near them, Wang Yin would target them just to get to me. This was my burden to carry. On the path to immortality, you eventually have to walk alone. I would handle Wang Yin myself, and once the dust settled, I'd find my friends again. For now, I just had to survive the dark. I had to carry my own weight. My problems were mine to solve, and I refused to let my friends get dragged into danger because of me. The middle-aged Taoist stepped forward and placed 2 piles of stones on a stone table. He flicked his wrist, tossing out a stack of small cloth bags. They were the perfect size to hang from a belt. "Look closely," he commanded, pointing at the piles. The first pile was white, giving off a soft, steady glow. The second pile was a dull, muddy gray. The difference was night and day. "The white stones are low-grade spirit stones," he explained. "These are your targets. Once you officially begin your cultivation, these will be your monthly resources. The gray stones, however, are scrap stones. We call them poison stones." He picked one up, his eyes narrowing. "They are full of impurities and toxins. They're useless for cultivation. In fact, they're dangerous. If you try to use them, they'll rot your meridians and damage your spiritual foundation. Your progress will hit a wall you can never break. If you ignore this warning, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." He had his assistants distribute samples, one of each stone, to every one of us. We needed to memorize the look, the color, and the feel of the energy they emitted. If we found a real spirit stone, it went into the bag. Then, he waved his sleeve again. A shower of glowing pearls fell toward us. "The mine is old and dark. The original lighting arrays are broken. Take 1 night pearl each for light. You have 12 hours. You will gather back at the entrance tomorrow at noon. We will count your harvest then." He paused, looking at our tired faces. "Some of you are wondering about food. You're wondering where you'll sleep or what you'll drink. Let me tell you now, there is nothing. No food, no rest, no water. You work until the job is done." A cold smile touched his lips. "If you can't handle 1 day of hardship, you'll never survive the path of immortality. If anyone wants to quit, speak now and we'll send you home." None of the 58 candidates moved. We had fought too hard to get here. 1 day without food wouldn't kill us. We could endure it. "Manager Mo will take you the rest of the way," the Taoist said. "He oversees the daily operations of the old sect grounds. Follow his orders." A man in his late 20s walked toward us. He was a bit stout, but carried himself with an air of authority. Managing a territory this vast with only a few dozen disciples required more than just status. It required strength. I suspected his cultivation was much higher than he let on. "You can call me Senior Brother Mo," he said casually. He tossed a small wooden boat onto the clearing. It expanded instantly, growing into a massive flying vessel. We scrambled aboard, and the ship rose, heading toward the back of the mountain. Back on the ground, the elders watched us leave. "Elder, isn't this a bit too harsh?" the ninth elder asked, glancing at a tall, dark-faced old man. This was Elder Wu Sheng, the head of law enforcement. He was the most feared man in the Cloud Sea sect. A few injuries are nothing, Wu Sheng replied coldly. When I was a disciple, people died in these trials. The world of cultivation is about the survival of the fittest. If they can't handle this small stage, they'll die even faster later. He looked toward the horizon, his expression grim. Our sect is weakening. Even our parent sect, the White Cloud sect, is fading. Other sects are already trying to step on our necks. We don't need mediocre disciples. We need monsters. We need powerhouses who can rise fast. If we don't find them, 1,000 years of history will be wiped out by our neighbors. The other elders fell silent. They knew he was right. The peace was an illusion. Up on the flying boat, the others were busy tucking their pearls and samples into their bags, staring excitedly at the approaching mountains. I saw my opening. I pulled the little fatty and Suing aside into a quiet corner. Listen, I whispered. Things are complicated for me right now. I'm going to move alone once we hit the caves. The two of you stay together. Don't separate and stay safe. But, Fatty started to argue. No buts, I cut him off. Just wait for me at the exit when the time is up. I walked away before they could ask questions. I already had my plan. Suing and I were already guaranteed spots in the inner sect. If I found any spirit stones, I wouldn't keep them for myself. I'd secretly hand them to the little fatty before the count. I was going to drag him into the top 3 with me, whether he liked it or not. That was the only way I could truly help him. The rest was up to the little fatty's own luck. Out of the 3 of us, he was the only one who hadn't secured a spot in the inner sect yet. I hoped he'd take my advice to heart. There it is. The mine entrance, Mo Guancher said, pointing toward the horizon. We all looked. At the foot of a massive mountain sat a wide, circular stone platform. Just behind it, a gaping black hole was carved into the rock face. It was enormous. The mountain itself was staggering in scale, sprawling across the landscape like a sleeping giant. It made sense why a spirit vein like this could be mined for decades, or even centuries. With tunnels running both deep underground and high into the peaks, it was a massive labyrinth. Our flying boat descended, gliding closer until it touched down firmly on the platform. Up close, the entrance felt even more imposing. It had clearly been abandoned for a long time. Thick weeds choked the opening, and the ground showed no signs of recent footprints. It was a dead place, forgotten by the world. As I stepped toward the entrance, a faint, refreshing breeze brushed against my face. My eyes widened. It was spiritual chi. Even though the mine had been picked clean of high-quality stones, remnants of trash, spirit stones still lingered. These weren't pure enough for cultivation, but they were still packed with energy, perfect for fertilizing spirit herb gardens or enriching the soil. The moment I inhaled that air, my heart skipped a beat. This scent, it was familiar. It was exactly like the mist that drifted off the surface of my apocalypse bead. The only difference was that the bead's mist was purer, more concentrated, and far more potent. It was the same essence, just a much higher grade. I realized then that the apocalypse bead was essentially a massive reservoir of high-quality spiritual energy. But how much did it hold? And how could I use it? I needed to know. This trial was the perfect chance to experiment. Back when I used the bead to purify my marrow-cleansing pill, it had stripped away the filth and left behind a glowing, high-tier essence. If the bead could upgrade a pill, could it do the same for these trash spirit stones? Could it turn a piece of junk into a genuine lower-grade spirit stone? If my theory was right, I'd just hit the jackpot. In the world of cultivation, spirit stones were the ultimate currency. With enough of them, I could grow stronger at lightning speed. I wouldn't just catch up to guys like Wang Yin, I'd leave them in the dust. I watched the crowd. Most people were heading for the tunnels that sloped downward. It was common logic. The deeper you go, the more likely you are to find a vein that was missed. Hundreds of tunnels branched out like veins in a leaf, but the underground ones were packed with desperate disciples. I slipped away from the group, moving along the edge of the plaza. I had 2 goals for this mission. First, I had to stay alert for an ambush from Wang Yin and find a way to strike back. Second, I had to find a quiet place to test the apocalypse bead. Meanwhile, Wang Yin wasn't just sitting around. He was watching me. He spotted two tough-looking teenagers whispering nearby, one tall, one short, both with mean streaks in their eyes. "Hey, you two," Wang Yin said, stepping into their circle. "Want to team up? Any spirit stones we find go entirely to you. I don't want a single one." The tall one narrowed his eyes. Everyone knew Wang Yin. He was one of the four who had already made the inner sect. "What's the catch? Nobody gives away stones for free. Let's talk over here," Wang Yin whispered, pulling them away from the crowd. "Look, I'm already in the inner sect. Being in the top 3 for this trial doesn't matter to me. If we find stones, they're yours. If we steal stones from others, they're yours too. I only want one thing, Yuan Shao." He gestured toward me. "I'm going to settle a score with him. If he finds stones, we take them. Even if he doesn't, I'm going to fight him. All I need from you is to help me pin him down. If anyone tries to interfere, you block them. I'll do the heavy lifting." The tall boy hesitated. He's a tough nut to crack. And who knows if there are even any stones left in this dump. We'd be taking a big risk for a maybe. Wang Yin grinned. He knew exactly how to reel them in. What if I throw in the cultivation formulas for the 3rd level of the Qi refining stage? As outer disciples, you only get levels 1 and 2. But as an inner disciple, I'll have access to the 3rd. I'll share it with you. In this world, if you're one step behind, you're always behind. This is your chance to keep pace with the elite. The two boys shared a look. Their greed won out. Deal. Just make sure you deliver that formula. I didn't see them plotting. I had already picked my path, a tunnel that led straight ahead into the mountain, rather than down. It was 10 feet high and 15 feet wide, spacious enough for a small group, but I was alone. I chose this path specifically because it was unpopular. Everyone else, including the little fatty and Su Ying, had gone deep underground. I wasn't here to scavenge for leftovers that had been missed for 100 years. I was here for privacy. This tunnel had been a main thoroughfare during the mining days, meaning the chances of finding a natural spirit stone here were practically zero. But that didn't matter. I didn't need to find a treasure. I was going to create one. Searching for something that probably didn't exist was a waste of time. I had a much more urgent mission. I needed to test my theory. If I succeeded, I wouldn't just find a stray spirit stone, I'd have as many as I wanted. My first priority was losing the crowd, especially Wang Yin. I couldn't let him or his lackeys catch a glimpse of the apocalypse bead's secrets. If he wanted to fight, he'd get one, but only after I finished my experiment. I gripped my night pearl tight, its soft glow lighting the way as I hurried forward. The deeper I went, the more the terrain changed. I hit a fork in the path where the single tunnel split into 2. I didn't hesitate and ducked into the left one. A few minutes later, I found another junction where 2 paths merged back into one. I smiled. These tunnels were a sprawling, chaotic spiderweb. They branched and fused like a massive underground labyrinth. It was the perfect place to disappear. In a maze like this, it was easy to walk for hours and never cross paths with another soul. I tapped my mechanical storage ring and tossed the night pearl inside. Total darkness swallowed me instantly. It was a risk, but it kept me hidden. If someone else approached with a light, I'd see them long before they saw me. Ever since the apocalypse bead had cleansed my marrow, my senses were sharper than ever. My eyes adjusted quickly, allowing me to see the rough outlines of the jagged walls even in the gloom. I slowed my pace just a little, navigating the shadows with ease. When I reached the next merging point, a bold idea struck me. Instead of pushing deeper into the mountain, I turned into the intersecting tunnel and started heading back toward the main entrance plaza. Wang Yin and his crew were likely chasing my ghost deeper into the first tunnel I'd entered. As long as they kept moving forward and I kept moving back, the distance between us would only grow. Even if Wang Yin realized he'd been played, I'd be long gone. I could return to the entrance, pick one of the hundreds of other tunnel openings, and he'd never find me in a single day. I moved through the dark for about 15 minutes until the dim light of the plaza appeared ahead. I stayed in the shadows, watching carefully. The area was deserted. Everyone had already vanished into the depths. Now was my chance. I bolted out and chose a tunnel that slanted sharply upward. Nobody looking for spirit stones would pick a path like this. Upward tunnels were usually short and were among the first to be excavated a century ago. They were stripped bone dry long ago. But that was exactly why I chose it. I wanted isolation. I hiked for another half hour, twisting through several more junctions, turning left then right until I was certain I was far from the plaza. I felt safe enough to pull the night pearl back out. The white light flooded the tunnel, revealing small, man-made platforms carved into the walls at regular intervals. These were likely old transit points for moving supplies or ore. Scattered across the floor were dozens of junk stones, gray, lifeless pebbles with barely a trace of energy. The experiment was on. I pulled a sample of junk stone from my bag and compared it to the ones on the ground. They were identical in look and feel. I began scooping them up, tossing them into my storage ring so they sat right next to the apocalypse bead. From my previous tests with the medicinal pills, I knew that proximity was key. The closer the object was to the bead, the faster the purification worked. I cleared out one platform and moved to the next, then the next. Soon, I had a massive pile of junk stones inside the ring, completely surrounding the bead. By my count, I was nearing the top of the mountain. The air felt different here. As I pushed further, I stumbled upon a platform that looked different from the others. It wasn't wide, and there were no junk stones scattered about. Instead, the ground was perfectly level and strangely clean, as if someone had swept it. I walked to the edge, running my hands along the stone walls. Nothing felt out of place until I spotted a pile of discarded rocks in a corner. They had clear tool marks on them, as if they'd been polished. I moved the rocks aside and tapped the wall behind them. Thump, thump, hollow. There was a space behind the stone. I pressed my weight against it, and a hidden stone door groaned, rotating slowly to reveal a narrow passage. It was dim and dusty. It looked like no one had stepped foot in here since the mines were abandoned. I walked about 50 feet inside and found two chambers branching off. The one on the left was large, about the size of a master bedroom. It held a crude stone table and a few stools. In the corner sat several sealed jars, thick with decades of dust. A row of night pearls was embedded in the wall. Most were dead, but a few still gave off a faint, dying flicker. I took a piece of cloth and wiped the grime away. The room instantly brightened. I crossed over to the right-hand chamber. This one was even larger. It had a rough stone bed covered in dried straw and a low stone platform with a meditation cushion. Someone had used this place for cultivation. Small alcoves were carved into the walls, holding a few wooden boxes. There were no night pearls here, but the room wasn't dark. A soft beam of natural light cut through the gloom. High on the wall, there was a small window, no bigger than 2 palms. I realized I was right against the outer shell of the mountain. The wall was only 6 inches thick here, and thick weeds growing outside perfectly camouflaged the opening. I had found it. The perfect hideout. I peered through the gaps in the weeds covering the small window. From this height, I could see the other peaks of the old Cloud Sea sect ruins. Directly below me sat a spirit medicine garden. The 3 characters for Spirit Herb Garden were carved boldly into a stone marker. It was a fenced-off area overflowing with lush, green spiritual plants. I turned my head slightly. To the side, I could see the circular platform where Feijo had landed earlier. The mechanical bird was still there, but Mo Guan was nowhere to be seen. I needed to get to work. I cleaned off the stone platform and placed a night pearl on the meditation cushion to give myself some light. Then, I grabbed a loose rock and blocked the small window. It was nearly evening. If I didn't cover the opening, the glow from the night pearl would leak out into the darkness. Even though the ruins were nearly empty, someone from the mountain base might spot the light. I couldn't afford any distractions for the experiment I was about to run. The previous owner likely left this room dark for the same reason, to stay hidden. I went back to the hidden entrance, secured the stone door, and returned to the center of the room. I sat cross-legged on the straw cushion. If the original owner of this place was still alive, I promised myself I'd thank them properly if we ever met. I opened my storage ring. My plan was to take out the scrap spirit stones I'd gathered along with the apocalypse bead. But the moment my mind entered the ring's space, I froze. Something had changed. The pile of scrap stones was covered in a layer of grime. They had turned a dull, dark gray. Only a few stones near the edge, the ones I'd picked up right before coming inside, were still their original color. Those had been far away from the apocalypse bead for less than 15 minutes. Everything else had transformed. I waved my hand, and the entire pile, along with the bead, appeared on the floor. The room was instantly flooded with a refreshing, thick spiritual energy. I picked up one of the gray-black stones and wiped away the soot. Beneath the filth lay a pure, snow-white spirit stone. My heart hammered against my ribs. It had changed from a worthless scrap stone into a white spirit stone. I stood up and pulled out the sample low-grade spirit stone the Cloud Sea sect had given me. I held the sample in my left hand and the newly upgraded white stone in my right. I compared them closely. The shapes were different. The sample was a perfectly cut cube, while mine was still an irregular, jagged lump. But the color? Both were white. In fact, mine was whiter. The sample had a faint luster, but my upgraded stone practically glowed. Even the scent was different. The energy coming off the sample was thin. My stone felt rich, dense, and incredibly soothing. There was no doubt. These were low-grade spirit stones. Not only that, their quality was far superior to the standard ones used in the cultivation world. I was rich. I was suddenly, obscenely rich. In cultivation, they say 4 things matter: wealth, companions, methods, and land. Wealth is always first. It isn't just money, it's spirit stones, magical tools, rare herbs, and pills. With enough stones, you can buy anything. Wealth doesn't necessarily make you a better cultivator, but it makes you a much faster one. I found myself missing old man Sikong Jaiyue. I wondered where he was now. He had given me this bead, and I realized now just how massive that gift really was. But I needed to see it happen with my own eyes. I needed to know exactly how the scrapstones upgraded. I also felt a nagging sense of anxiety, like I was forgetting something important, but the thought remained just out of reach. I pushed the worry aside. I had to focus on the experiment. I took the few scrap stones that hadn't changed yet and placed them right next to the apocalypse bead. I watched. After a few breaths, faint wisps of mist began to drift out of the bead. It looked like steam rising from a cup of hot water, only thinner and harder to see. Was this mist charging the scrap stones? I didn't have the answer yet. I reached out and touched the bead, feeling for the tiny indentation I'd found earlier. The mist was leaking out from that very spot. I didn't dare stare at the hole for too long. Last time I did, my head felt like it was going to explode, and I felt a terrifying suction pulling at my soul. I wasn't strong enough to explore those mysteries yet. The mist felt like the energy in the spirit stones, only purer. I realized this was spiritual chi in its rawest form, visible to the naked eye only because of the bead's power. Usually, you can only feel chi. You can't see it unless you're near a high-level spirit spring. 10 minutes passed. A fine gray dust began to form on the surface of the scrap stones. Black impurities seeped out, mixing with the gray until the stones looked like old furniture covered in decades of filth. After about 30 minutes, the process stopped. I picked up a stone and blew away the dust. A brilliant, white low-grade spirit stone sat in my palm. It took only half an hour to create wealth out of trash. If I could find a steady supply of scrap stones, I would never run out of money. I knew exactly where to find more, the very mines I was hiding in. I was supposed to be an inner disciple, but I still had to serve a year of manual labor as an outer disciple first. I made a mental note to fight for a position here at the old ruins. I needed to stay near these mines. Then, a bold, dangerous thought struck me. If the bead could turn scrap into low-grade stones in 30 minutes, what else could it do? If the apocalypse bead could turn trash into treasure, what would happen if I used it on the low-grade spirit stones I had just created? Could I upgrade them again? Could I turn them into mid-grade stones? I had to know. I gathered the pile of newly purified stones and pressed them tightly against the bead. I stared at them, my eyes unblinking, waiting for the magic to happen. Half an hour passed. Then an hour. 2 hours went by, and my neck started to ache from the tension. I looked down, but the stones hadn't changed at all. They were still the same brilliant white. I sank into thought. Was the bead limited? Could it only perform a single upgrade from scrap to low-grade? If that was the case, I would never be able to produce mid-grade, high-grade, or peak-grade stones. I'd be stuck with the lowest currency forever. Then, a realization hit me. These stones were already processed. They were born from trash. Maybe the bead couldn't upgrade something that had already been touched by its power. I needed a control group, a natural low-grade stone that hadn't been purified yet. My heart hammered against my ribs. I had one. The sect had given me a sample stone when I joined the Cloud Sea sect. I fumbled through my bag and pulled it out. It was small and precision cut, but it was a genuine, natural low-grade spirit stone. I pressed it against the apocalypse bead, my breath hitching in my throat. Within 15 minutes, something happened. A fine white powder began to leak from the stone's surface. The coating grew thicker and thicker. After nearly half an hour, the reaction stopped. The air in the small cavern suddenly felt fresh and sweet, filled with a delightful energy. I picked up the stone and blew away the dust. My eyes widened. Sitting in my palm was a translucent, glowing green gem. Green. I remembered what the senior disciple, Zhang Dehai, had told us. White was low-grade. Green was mid-grade. Blue was high-grade. Purple was peak-grade, and the legendary absolute-grade stones were a dark orange. This was a mid-grade spirit stone. I had actually done it. The bead wasn't broken. It just couldn't upgrade the same object twice. It could jump any natural stone up by one level, but it couldn't turn scrap into a diamond in 2 steps. I gripped the green stone, feeling the thick, rich spiritual energy pulsing against my skin. I tried one more test, placing this new green stone back against the bead to see if it would turn blue. I waited an hour, but nothing happened. It confirmed my theory, 1 upgrade per item. The apocalypse bead was a bottomless mystery. That tiny indentation on its surface still bothered me, the way it seemed to pull at my soul if I looked too long. I wasn't strong enough to uncover its secrets yet. If I didn't die in this dangerous world, maybe one day I'd understand what I was holding. But for now, I had 3 priorities. First, I had to give some stones to my fat friend to ensure he made it into the top 3 and became an inner disciple. Second, I had to deal with Wang Yin. I needed to beat him so badly that he'd be too terrified to breathe in my direction. Third, I had to find a way to stay posted here at the old ruins so I could keep harvesting scrap stones. Meanwhile, further down the tunnels, Wang Yin was losing his mind. He had seen me enter the mines and had followed me in with 2 other disciples, a tall one and a short one. He thought catching me would be easy, but he hadn't accounted for the maze of tunnels. Should we split up? The short one asked, looking back at the first fork in the path. Wang Yin scowled. He knew that if he wasn't there to watch them, these 2 wouldn't lift a finger against me. No, he snapped. We stay together. We'll take the left path and gamble on it. His luck held for a moment. They chose the right direction at first, but they soon reached the junction where I had doubled back toward the surface. Forward or back? The tall one asked. Wang Yin hesitated. He knew I wasn't a coward. He'd seen me fight at the inn. He assumed I'd be pushed by the same greed as everyone else, searching for stones deep in the dark. He bet that I was somewhere ahead, waiting for a confrontation or hunting for treasure. He bet wrong. While I was safely tucked away testing my god-tier artifact, Wang Yin and his lackeys were marching deeper into a dead end. They reached a platform at the very back of the mine where the walls were bare. There were no white stones, and there was no sign of me. Fuming, Wang Yin turned around. He didn't care about the stones anymore. He just wanted my blood. The tall and short lackeys with Wang Yin were getting desperate. Their main goal was to find white low-grade spirit stones, but the mines were stingy. Along the way, we had crossed paths with another pair of disciples, one fat, one thin. Wang Yin's group hadn't hesitated. They beat them down and ransacked their bags, but they found absolutely nothing. It's hard to rob someone who has nothing to give. Aside from those 2, the tunnels felt like a tomb. With dozens of people scattered across hundreds of paths, it was easy to feel completely alone. Wang Yin checked his internal clock. 2 or 3 hours had passed, and there was still no sign of me. A sudden thought struck him. What if I had doubled back to the main plaza at the entrance? It made sense. I knew he was hunting me, so a flanking maneuver was exactly what a smart fighter would do. Listen, Wang Yin told his 2 companions. Let's head back to the plaza and wait. We'll hide near one of the tunnel exits where we can watch the open ground. He has to come back eventually. The 2 lackeys hesitated. They wanted stones, not a stakeout. I'll make it worth your while, Wang Yin promised, his voice dripping with false sincerity. Once I get my monthly resources as an inner disciple, I'll have 3 spirit stones. I'll give each of you one from my first batch. He saw them wavering and pushed harder. We've searched for hours and found nothing. The chances of us stumbling onto a stone now are 0. But if we wait at the plaza, we can ambush anyone who actually found something. It's a guaranteed win. The tall and short disciples nodded, convinced by his logic. Wang Yin turned away, a cold sneer forming on his lips. He had no intention of giving these 2 idiots anything. Once he got his stones, he'd likely give them a beating instead of a reward. An hour later, the trio reached the edge of the plaza. They didn't step into the light. Instead, they tucked away their glowing night pearls and huddled in the shadows of a tunnel mouth, eyes fixed on the open space outside. I was already on my way back. After finishing my experiments with the mechanical ring and the bead, I left the hidden stone room. I shut the rotating door and piled the scrap rocks back in front of it, masking the entrance. I might need this place again. Finding my friends, Fatty and Su Ying, in this maze was impossible. My best bet was to wait for them at the plaza. Plus, I wanted to find a way to slip them a few of the spirit stones I'd found without raising suspicion. It was the middle of the night now. Outside the mines, the world was pitched in total darkness, but the plaza still had 2 large, glowing night pearls hanging from the ceiling. The visibility was decent. As I approached the exit, I tucked my own night pearl away. I didn't want to be a walking target. Lately, I had noticed my senses changing. My vision was becoming incredibly sharp. I could see tiny details from far away, and my night vision was improving every single day. I knew that for high-level cultivators, physical sight wasn't as important as divine sense, but for a beginner like me, these eyes were a godsend. I reached the edge of the plaza but didn't step out. I knew Wang Yin was a vindictive snake, and a trap was likely. I suddenly slapped my own forehead. I was being an idiot. I had the perfect tool for this in my storage ring, the God's Hidden Whisper. This was the artifact the old man, Sikong Jiayue, used to hide from powerful immortals. If it could hide him from masters, it could certainly hide me from a brat like Wang Yin. Last time, I had to fight for my life. This time, I wanted to have a little fun. I pulled the artifact from my ring and activated it the way the old man had taught me. With a flick of my wrist, a transparent bubble expanded, wrapping around me before turning completely invisible. From the outside, I had vanished. The bubble was incredible. It blocked sound, sight, and even spiritual fluctuations. People outside couldn't hear or see a thing, but I could see and hear everything perfectly. I walked boldly onto the plaza. I looked at the hundreds of tunnel entrances lining the perimeter. Searching all of them would take months, but checking just the ones near the plaza would take less than an hour. If Wang Yin was waiting, he'd be close. I started at the far end, moving from one tunnel mouth to the next. Even in the dim light, my enhanced eyes caught every detail. By the 5th tunnel, I saw them. It wasn't Wang Yin. It was the fat and thin duo he had beaten up earlier. They were huddled in the dark, whispering. "Today is a disaster," the fat one groaned, rubbing his face. "Not a single stone, and I got my teeth kicked in. Look how swollen my face is." "You're not swollen, you're just fat," the thin one snapped, though he looked just as bad. "I'm the one who lost 2 teeth. Why did you run?" "Because you bolted, they hit us even harder." "I was scared," the fat one whispered back. "Who knew they'd actually search us? It's not like I'm a pretty girl hiding treasure in my clothes. If I had a weapon, I would have fought back. I wouldn't have run." The thin one started to mock him, but he winced as the movement pulled at his bruised jaw. They had the numbers, and Wang Yin is an inner disciple. But if I had something in my hands, I'd show them. I stood just a few feet away, invisible, listening to them try to salvage their pride. My storage ring was basically a warehouse. Before leaving home, I had stocked up on everything: food, tools, hunting gear, even farm implements. If these 2 wanted to fight back, I was happy to help. Clang! I tossed 2 items out of the bubble. They landed right at their feet. The thin boy reached out and picked up a heavy iron rod. The fat boy grabbed a sturdy manure shovel. They stared at the weapons, then at each other, stunned. The weapons had appeared out of thin air. Now they had no more excuses. I smiled to myself and kept moving, looking for my real target. I moved along the edge of the square, checking every cave entrance one by one. When I reached the center, I finally spotted movement. 3 people were lying in ambush right by a tunnel opening. I recognized them immediately. It was Wang Yin and his 2 lackeys, the tall boy and the short boy. Wang Yin crouched at the front, eyes darting around as he peered out, while the other 2 stayed a few paces back, ready to spring. When Yuan Xiao shows up, I'll take him head on, Wang Yin whispered, his voice cold and focused. You 2 circle around behind him. Hit him when he's not looking. He had no idea I was standing right next to him. Don't worry, the tall one replied with a smirk. For those 3 layers of cultivation formulas and 2 low-grade spirit stones, we'll make sure you're satisfied. He turned to his shorter partner. I'll kick him in the rear to knock him off balance. Then you grab his legs so he can't move. I couldn't help but smile. If they wanted to attack from behind, I'd show them how it was done. I pulled a sturdy wooden club from my storage ring and crept behind the tall boy. I swung with everything I had, slamming the club right into his backside. The tall boy let out a blood-curdling howl. The force sent him flying out of the cave entrance, skidding across the dirt of the square. He rolled on the ground, clutching his rear in pure agony. What was that? He shrieked, his face twisting in pain. Why did it hit me there? I haven't even gone to the bathroom today. Before the short boy could even react, I swung again. Crack! Another howl echoed through the mines. The short boy went flying just like his friend, landing hard on the edge of the square. He looked terrified. He had seen his friend get hit, turned around to look, and saw absolutely nothing before he was struck down himself. What kind of monster targets the lower half? He sobbed, clutching himself. Someone tell me, did I just mess my pants or not? Nearby, the fat and thin duo I had armed earlier watched the scene unfold. They looked at the iron rod and the manure shovel in their hands, then at each other. Are we doing this? The fat one asked, his eyes gleaming. If I don't hit back now, I'll be disrespecting this shovel. Fatty, you're a hero, the thin one said, gripping his iron rod. I take back what I said. Your face isn't fat. It's just swollen from their punches. Let's go. They charged. The tall and short duo were already incapacitated, rolling on the ground trying to protect their heads and their bruised backsides. The fat and thin brothers showed no mercy, raining blows down on them. It was poetic justice. Eventually, the 2 bullies stopped fighting back, reduced to nothing but pained gasps. The air suddenly turned foul. The fat and thin brothers paused, sniffing the air. In their village, people always threatened to beat the crap out of each other. It looked like they had finally achieved it literally. Back in the cave, Wang Yin reacted the moment his lackeys were hit. He rolled to the side and scrambled to his feet, pulling out a glowing night pearl to light up the dark. He scanned the tunnel, but it was empty. There was no one there. Wang Yin wasn't a complete fool. He had heard stories of spirit beasts that could turn invisible or high-level cultivators who could hide their breath with treasures. But he didn't believe anyone like that would be in a tiny mine like this. He pulled a sharp dagger from his boot, unsheathing it with a metallic hiss. He began to creep deeper into the cave, searching for the invisible attacker. As he passed me, I stepped up and brought the club down hard on the back of his neck. Wang Yin collapsed instantly. He was ruthless, but he wasn't invincible. The dagger slipped from his hand and plunged straight into the hard stone floor, buried up to the hilt. I raised an eyebrow. That blade was incredibly sharp, definitely not a common item. I yanked it out and tossed it into my storage ring. I'd examine it later. Searching his body, I found the standard sect bag, but he also had a hidden pouch. Inside were several high-quality talismans marked with symbols for wind, fire, and thunder. These were far too advanced for a disciple like him. His brother, Wang Jin, must have given them to him as a trump card. Too bad he never got the chance to use them. Then, I remembered something important. I pulled the sample low-grade spirit stone out of Wang Yin's bag and swapped it for my own. My original sample had transformed into a glowing green mid-grade stone thanks to the apocalypse bead. There was no way I could explain that to the sect. Now, if anyone asked questions, Wang Yin would be the one holding the evidence. I wasn't a saint, and I certainly wasn't the type to swallow my pride when someone tried to hurt me. You kick my butt, I'll take your life. I decided to make the scene look like a beast attack. I used the dagger to shred Wang Yin's clothes and pants, fraying the edges to look like claw marks. I messed up his hair and left him looking like he'd been mauled by a wolf. Satisfied, I slipped away. Outside, the fat and thin brothers heard the commotion from the cave, the thud of a body falling and the sound of fabric tearing. They crept toward the light of the night pearl, weapons raised. When they saw Wang Yin lying there, half naked and shredded, they froze. "What kind of beast does this?" the thin one whispered, looking horrified. "It didn't even spare a man like Wang Yin." The fat one brushed the hair out of the unconscious man's face. "It's definitely him. This is the guy who punched me in the face earlier." He looked at his partner. "Well," the thin one didn't say a word. He just raised his iron rod and started wailing on Wang Yin's legs and rear. "That's for my teeth." The fat one joined in, but remembering the warning about killing people, he avoided the shovel and just started kicking Wang Yin in the face. "You like hitting faces? How does it feel?" I watched from the shadows, feeling a bit awkward. One was obsessed with the butt, the other with the face. It was a brutal, messy sight, but I didn't feel a shred of pity. Once the brothers had vented their rage, they looked at the masterpiece they had created and shared a satisfied nod. They hurried away, disappearing into another tunnel to bury their weapons and hide the evidence. I found a new spot to hide. I wasn't going to bother looking for low-grade spirit stones anymore. I knew I wouldn't find any naturally, and besides, I was satisfied with what I'd already accomplished. My plan was simple: get some sleep, wait for the morning assembly, and settle in as an outer disciple. I had dealt with Wang Yin for now, and according to my internal clock, there were still several hours left before the trial ended. I had one task left. I needed to secretly get a few spirit stones to that little fatty, who lied, so he could clinch a spot in the top 3. Most of the candidates were still deep in the mines, desperately searching, so I couldn't let this time go to waste. I headed back toward the main plaza and picked a tunnel that led even deeper underground. I tucked my cloak of stealth back into my ring and held my night pearl high. As I explored, I noticed the deeper I went, the more trash stones were scattered around. To a regular cultivator, these were toxic junk. To me, they were pure white low-grade spirit stones waiting to happen. Some people say bending over all day is exhausting. I don't believe them. If you asked me to carry 100 pounds of bricks, I'd struggle. But if you told me to carry 100 pounds of silver, I'd not only carry it, I'd run and do a little dance while I was at it. Money is the best motivation. As I pushed forward, I saw a flicker of light from a platform ahead. Finally, I'd run into another candidate. These tunnels were a maze. The deeper you went, the harder it was to find a soul. I intentionally made my footsteps heavy as I approached. I wanted them to know I was coming so they wouldn't think I was trying to ambush them. I stepped onto the platform and stopped. There stood a girl who looked like she was carved from fine jade. She was holding a spirit stone, looking at me with wide, innocent eyes. "It's you," we both said at the same time. It was Murong Shui. She came from a prestigious cultivation family and had been a top performer in the first 2 tests. She definitely recognized me. After all, I'd stolen the spotlight back at the plaza. I looked at her hand. It wasn't the sample stone we were shown earlier. It was a genuine, naturally formed low-grade spirit stone. I was stunned. So, there actually were real stones in this mine. I realized I might have misjudged the situation. The sect had sent 58 of us in here not just as a competition, but as a test of luck and destiny. The mines had been picked over for centuries, but in a place this massive, there were bound to be a few scraps left behind or hidden veins that had been missed. Luck, it seemed, was a talent in itself. "Did you find any?" she asked softly. "I haven't picked up a single one," I said, shaking my head. Technically, it wasn't a lie. I hadn't found any. I'd manufactured mine. "I've only found 2, she admitted, opening her palm to show me a small compass. "My grandfather gave me this before I came to Cloud Sea. It's not powerful, but it can sense spiritual energy within about 10 feet. It points where the energy is strongest. That's the only reason I found these buried in the walls." She was surprisingly open with me. I liked her honesty. "You should hide those in your bag," I warned her. "Don't let anyone see. People are already fighting and stealing stones in other parts of the mine. You wouldn't want to be caught by someone who'd make a girl like you cry for her parents, right?" I laughed, and she giggled along with me, quickly tucking the stones away. "Do you want to search together?" she invited. "Thanks for the offer, but I'm actually looking for two specific people," I declined. "The fat boy and the girl?" she asked. She meant Suing. Since they were both already fast-tracked as inner disciples, she knew her. "Yes. Have you seen them?" I asked urgently. "I ran into them just a bit ago. They took the right fork back there. They shouldn't be far." She pointed toward a dark tunnel. "Thanks. And remember, keep your haul hidden when you get back to the plaza." I didn't wait for an answer. I sprinted in the direction she pointed. Luckily, this stretch of the tunnel didn't have any branches. After running for the time it takes a stick of incense to burn, I saw a light on a platform ahead. It had to be them. I tucked my night pearl away and pulled out 4 low-grade spirit stones. I threw on my cloak of stealth and vanished into the shadows. I decided 4 stones was the perfect amount. I'd been here for hours and found nothing. Wang Yin's group found nothing. Even Murong Shui, with a magical compass, only found 2. If I gave Hu Lai too many, the sect elders would get suspicious. He wasn't a good liar. He'd crack under questioning. I couldn't give them to him face-to-face either. If he knew they came from me, I'd have too much to explain, and my plan to stay under the radar would be ruined. As I crept closer, I heard Hu Lai's voice echoing off the walls. "Do you think these elders are playing us? We've been staring until our eyes hurt and haven't found a single stone." "We still have 3 or 4 hours," Su Ying's voice replied calmly. That middle-aged Taoist running the test looked like a true immortal. "I don't think he'd trick us." "You're right," Hu Lai sighed. "He did have that medicinal fragrance about him, like someone who spends his life around alchemy. He seemed legit. Whatever. If I have to be an outer disciple, I'll be an outer disciple. I can enter the annual competition in 3 years and work my way up. 3 years is nothing to a cultivator. I've got this." I smiled. Hu Lai always had a good attitude. He didn't let things get to him. "Wait, what's that?" he muttered. "Suing, look at this." Hu Lai's voice boomed through the tunnel. I watched from the darkness as Suing hurried over to the corner of the platform. There, tucked against the base of the wall, 4 white spirit stones were visible. I had buried them halfway into the dirt, leaving just enough exposed to catch the light of their night pearl. Hu Lai looked stunned. He'd been searching for hours without finding a single scrap, and now, 4 high-quality stones were practically sitting in his lap. He picked them up, cradling them in his palms like they were made of glass. He compared them to the sample stone the sect had provided. They weren't just a match. They actually looked pure. "Here, Suing," Hu Lai said, his face splitting into a massive grin. 2 for you, 2 for me. And if we see Yuan Shao later and he hasn't found any, I'll give him one of mine." I felt a pang of warmth. Even when he was winning, the guy was thinking about me. "Hu Lai, don't be silly," Suing replied with a soft laugh. "We don't need them. The elders already said the 4 of us are guaranteed spots as inner disciples. Even if we win this test, the stones have to be handed over. They don't belong to us. But for you, these 4 stones could put you in the top 3. You could join us as an inner disciple right now." Hu Lai froze. The realization hit him like a physical weight. Out of our group, he was the only one stuck in the outer sect. If he turned these in, his entire future changed. He wouldn't have to go home and manage his family's mundane business. He'd be a true elite. "You're right," he whispered, looking like he was about to float away from pure joy. He didn't argue further. He stuffed the stones into his cloth bag and slapped his belly. "All right, I'm fired up. Let's find more." I watched them disappear down the tunnel, laughing to myself as I stepped out of the shadows. My plan had worked perfectly. By burying the stones, I made sure their story would be airtight. When the elders questioned them, they'd speak with the absolute confidence of people who just got lucky. Truth is always the best lie. With that settled, I had one goal left. I needed to figure out how to stay stationed at this old mountain site after the test. As a new inner disciple, I'd likely have a year of mandatory service. If I could spend that year here, I could strip this entire hidden mine bare. I pulled out my night pearl and took a different path. 3 hours passed. While Hu Lai and Suing found nothing else, my storage ring was getting heavy with trash, stones that were treasures to me. As I approached a junction, I heard a strange sound. Asterisk scritch, scritch, crunch, asterisk. It sounded like something was chewing. There was no light coming from the platform ahead. I held my night pearl high and crept forward, peeking around the jagged rock wall. 2 eyes stared back at me. It was a stone spirit eagle. It looked exactly like the one the fourth elder kept, but while his was a dull gray, this one was shimmering gold with a splash of crimson on its tail. It was tiny, a fledgling. It was small enough to hide in a sleeve. The little guy froze, a half-chewed spirit stone still clutched in its tiny talons. It looked like a toddler caught with its hand in the cookie jar. As I stepped closer, it panicked, dropped its snack, and bolted into a small crevice in the wall. A second later, its little head popped back out, watching me with intense curiosity. I knew these creatures. They lived to dig and eat spirit stones. It made sense one would be living here in an old mine. I reached into my bag and pulled out a low-grade spirit stone. I placed it on the ground and gave it a gentle push toward the crevice. In my hometown, no kid could resist a candied hawthorn stick. I figured a spirit eagle wouldn't be much different. The fledgling's beak twitched. It sniffed the air, catching the scent of pure energy. It started making frantic cheep-cheep sounds, pacing back and forth, but it stayed in the hole. "Tougher than you look, huh?" I muttered. I pulled out a second stone and pushed it forward. That did it. The eagle scrambled out of the hole, circling the stones with wide, hungry eyes. It looked torn between its survival instinct and its stomach. I decided to play hard to get. I reached down, scooped up both stones, and turned to walk away. I heard the frantic patter of tiny feet behind me immediately. I almost burst out laughing. I stopped and looked back. The eagle stopped instantly, turning its head the other way and pretending to look at the cave wall. It was acting like it didn't even know I existed. We stood there in a ridiculous standoff for several minutes. Finally, I knelt back down. I pulled out a third stone and held all three in my open palm. "Don't get greedy now," I whispered. "3 stones for a friendship. That's a fair deal." Greed finally won. The golden blur shot forward, landing right in my palm. It grabbed a stone with both claws and started crunching away, its face full of pure bliss. It was used to eating trash stones. This was like a 5-star meal. I gently carried the bird back to its hole and set it down, tossing the remaining stones inside. "Maybe I'll see you again," I said, throwing a few extra stones deep into the crevice for good measure. "If I can stay here, I'll bring more." As I walked away, I looked back one last time. The little golden eagle was standing at the edge of the platform, its neck stretched out, watching me go. I waved and disappeared into the dark. I couldn't take it with me yet. My future was too uncertain, but I had a feeling this wasn't the last time I'd see my expensive new friend. Taking the little golden eagle with me wasn't an option. It would have been its death sentence. My friend Yahello once told me that carrying a spirit pet required a specialized spirit bag or a beast ring. They work like storage rings, but are designed for living creatures, with internal spaces that can hold multiple beasts at once. I made a mental note to get one as soon as possible. The collection time was approaching. I chose a different tunnel to head back to the main plaza, picking up a few more low-grade spirit stones along the way to keep my pockets full. Suddenly, the night pearl in my hand began to vibrate. It pulsed with a 5-colored light. This was the signal. We had 1 hour to return to the mine entrance. I decided right then that I wouldn't turn in a single low-grade spirit stone. I didn't want any extra attention. For the 4 of us already recruited as inner disciples, the top 3 rewards didn't matter much anyway. My priority was helping little Fatty get accepted. If I turned in nothing, I'd stay invisible. That suited me perfectly. This trip had been a massive success. I had enough stones for my own cultivation. I'd found those 2 mysterious rooms on the mountain, and I'd met the eagle. But I had to stay sharp. I had knocked Wang Yin unconscious, and even if he didn't know it was me, we were already enemies. His backer, Wang Jin, was an even bigger threat. As an inner disciple, Wang Jin had more power and more ways to kill me. Then there was the apocalypse bead. That secret was a ticking time bomb. I realized I needed to distance myself from little Fatty and Suing for a while. I couldn't risk dragging them into my mess. The path of cultivation is a lonely one, and my immediate task was simple: get stronger or die. When I reached the plaza, most people were already there, chatting in small groups. The tall guy I'd dealt with earlier had finally woken up. He realized he was covered in his own filth and smelling like a sewer. People were literally holding their noses and backing away. His face turned a deep, burning red. The legends were true. You really could have the literal crap beaten out of you. He scrambled up, one hand covering his face and the other clutching his backside, and bolted into the nearby tunnel to hide. But his luck was rotten. He ran straight into the area where Wang Yin was still sprawled out on the ground. He stopped dead, forgetting his own misery for a second. Seeing Wang Yin in an even more disgusting state made him feel strangely better. He wasn't the biggest loser anymore. The short guy woke up next. He saw the crowd pointing and laughing at the smell and tried to play dead, but once his partner ran off, he couldn't bear the shame alone. He did the same, one hand on face, one on but sprint into the tunnel. When he saw Wang Yin, he actually burst out laughing. It was a classic case of finding joy in someone else's greater misfortune. Nearby, the fat and skinny duo who had watched the whole thing were snickering. But then the skinny one paused, tapping his leg. "Wait a minute," he whispered. "How did that iron bar and that manure shovel just happen to be lying right there when we needed them?" By noon, a figure descended from the sky on a flying sword. It was Manager Mo. "Everyone out of the cave," he announced, his voice echoing. "Gather on the platform for the head count." We filed out. Murong Shui, Little Fatty, and Suing made it just in time. When Mo realized 3 people were missing, the crowd started giggling. I caught his eye and pointed back toward the plaza. He understood immediately. Mo went inside alone. Even faced with the stench and the sight of Wang Yin's group, his expression didn't flicker. He performed a quick hand seal, pointed a finger, and Wang Yin jolted awake. Mo tossed 3 sets of servant robes at them and told them they had 15 minutes to wash up in the pond behind the rockery. Once everyone was cleaned up and back at the selection plaza, the middle-aged Taoist in charge asked for the results. Only 2 people had found anything. Little Fatty had found 4 low-grade stones, and Murong Shui had found 2. The announcement came quickly. Little Fatty was officially accepted as an inner disciple. That brought our group to 5. Murong Shui, Wang Yin, Su Ying, me, and Little Fatty. The Taoist, who turned out to be the 6th elder, Yao Feng, looked at Little Fatty with genuine interest. "I am in charge of the sect's alchemy," he said. "Little Fatty, you have incredible luck. Would you like to study under me? Even during your first year of chores, you can work in my lab." "I'm honored, Master." Little Fatty chirped, not even waiting for a formal ceremony. The rest of the placements followed. Wang Yin was taken in by the 4th elder, Tian Chou, who also happened to be Wang Jin's master. It was a perfect match of 2 ruthless snakes. Murong Shui and Su Ying were recruited by the 5th elder, a woman whose techniques were suited for female cultivators. Then, they turned to me. "Lin Yuan," Elder Yao Feng said, looking at me thoughtfully. "Your performance was so outstanding that several elders fought over who should take you. We couldn't decide. To be fair, we're sending you to the Hall of Erudition for your first year. You'll be a high-level assistant, organizing archives and helping the lecturers. After a year, once you understand the sect better, you can choose your own master. What do you think?" I nodded. A quiet job in a library full of information? It was exactly what I needed. The 6th elder, Yao Feng, didn't want things to be too hard for me. He liked my potential and suggested a lighter workload, so I'd have more time to practice my cultivation. "We have the Spirit Beast Garden." The 4th elder, Tian Chou, cut in eagerly. "We need help feeding the beasts. Lin Yuan, would you like to come to our garden as an assistant?" I knew better than to say yes. Tian Chou's place was the last place I wanted to be. He was Wang Jin's master, a dangerous man, and I had no master of my own to protect me yet. Besides, I had a secret. The abandoned mine at the old mountain gate was full of spirit stones just waiting for me to pick them up. That was a real treasure trove. Why would I leave that behind to follow a master to the new sect site? "Thank you for the kind offer, elders," I said, bowing low. But I saw a spirit herb garden near the entrance to the mine earlier. I've always been interested in growing herbs. I'd like to stay here at the old ruins and work as an assistant in the herb garden. I want to do my part for the sect right here. I figured a year would be plenty of time to strip that mine clean. Tian Chou's face darkened. "Ungrateful brat," he muttered under his breath. But then a cold smile touched his lips. If I stayed here, the place would be deserted. No one would be around to stop him from investigating me. "I think it's a fine idea," the 9th elder, Zhou Tian, spoke up. He seemed to want to help me out. "Even if this is the old site, It's still the foundation of our Cloud Sea sect. The herb garden here is small, but as long as he can guarantee a steady monthly supply, he's contributing. He looked at the head elder. What do you think? The head elder thought for a moment, then nodded. Since it's your choice, we won't force you. Like Jiu said, both sites are our foundation. If you manage the garden well, you're serving the sect. But be warned, no one will be here to teach you techniques. You'll have to figure things out on your own. He gestured toward the man in charge of the ruins. If you get stuck, ask Manager Mo. His cultivation is very solid. He's one of our best. If he wasn't so busy managing this place, he probably would have reached the foundation establishment stage by now. I tucked that information away. Manager Mo was a powerhouse, right on the verge of a breakthrough. I definitely needed to stay on his good side. I turned and bowed to him. Mo didn't act superior at all. He simply returned the bow with a calm, steady gaze. He was the type of man who didn't show his emotions easily, but he clearly knew how to handle people. All accepted disciples, come forward, the elders announced. The outer disciples went first. They received the first 2 layers of the Chi refining manual and their first 2 months of resources, a single low-grade spirit stone. They were told they had to finish their chores before they could practice. In 3 years, they'd have a chance to compete for a spot in the inner sect. Then it was our turn. As inner disciples, we received the first 3 layers of the manual and 3 low-grade spirit stones. We were told we could participate in the sect's grand competition every year. The rewards were huge, spiritual weapons and rare pills, including the foundation building pill. When I took my 3 stones and the manual, my heart raced. I didn't care about the stones. I could evolve those whenever I wanted. But the manual? That was the key. Stones get spent, but strength stays with you forever. Chi refining is the foundation of everything. Just like the buildings in the city, if the foundation isn't solid, the whole thing collapses. A strong start meant I could eventually fight people way above my level. The selection is over, Elder Yao Feng announced. Aside from Lin Yuan, everyone else returns to the sect now. He grabbed Little Fatty's hand and led him onto a small flying boat, looking incredibly pleased. The other elders followed suit, boarding their own boats or mounting flying beasts. The outer disciples piled onto a massive flying vessel led by the second elder. The crowd vanished into the sky. Within minutes, the square was silent. It was just me, Manager Mo, and a few others. Mo handed me 3 sets of Cloud Sea sect robes and a jade identity token. Get used to the quiet, he said with a small smile. It's always like this. People who like excitement don't last long here. I'm Mo Fei. You can call me Senior Brother Mo. Greetings, Senior Brother Mo, I replied. I wasn't going to be shy about it. We were both inner disciples now. Lin Yuan, your friend Zhang Dahai asked me to look after you before he left, Mo Fei said. He's a good man. He even begged his master, the 9th elder, to let you guys work in the herb garden if you failed the entrance exam. He wanted to make sure you had a place to stay. It's rare to find someone that big-hearted in this sect. I felt a lump in my throat. Zhang Dahai really had gone above and beyond for us. If everyone in the cultivation world was like him, there'd be a lot less blood and a lot more warmth. I chuckled to myself, knowing that was a pipe dream. People like him were 1 in a million. Mo Fei started showing me around. Even though the old site was mostly empty, it still had about 80 disciples living there. It was like a small, quiet village spread across 10 mountain peaks and dozens of courtyards. Most of the buildings were covered in dust, but they still held the history of the sect. This was my new home. This was where I would begin. The old site of the sect was massive, but there were only about 80 of us scattered across the mountain. Most days, you wouldn't see a single soul. We only gathered once a month at the martial arts hall for a meeting to handle business and distribute resources. The rest of the time, we were left to our own devices. Mo Fei explained that it was hard to earn rewards here because most of the facilities were sealed. On the bright side, it was also hard to get in trouble. My new post, the Spirit Herb Garden, was one of the few places still functioning. I had to hand over a set amount of herbs every quarter, but the scale was small and the work wasn't heavy. Most other places, like the Spirit Beast Park and the Treasure Pavilion, have moved to the new site, Mo Fei said. But the Alchemy Lab is an exception. He told me about a man we called Mad Uncle. He was an old cultivator who refused to leave. He was obsessed with alchemy but lacked any actual talent. Out of 10 batches of pills, 9.5 would end up as black ash or toxic trash. People called him the low-level alchemist. When the sect moved 100 years ago, he vowed he wouldn't leave until he crafted a perfect foundation-building pill. He'd been stuck there ever since. He's in his own world, Mo Fei chuckled. He often raids the herb garden for supplies. He even claims half the garden belongs to him. You'll definitely run into him. He's unpredictable and sometimes gets violent, so be careful. Even the sect master treats him with respect because of his seniority. I scratched my head, feeling a bit uneasy. Dealing with a madman wasn't exactly the peaceful start I was hoping for. There's one more thing, Mo Fei added, his voice dropping. A mother and daughter are staying in the Spirit Beast Park as guests. The sect master brought them here a year ago. They aren't part of our sect. We don't serve them, but we don't disturb them either. Just stay away from their area. I nodded, taking mental notes. Then, I decided to ask about the one place I truly cared about. Senior brother, what about the mine in the back mountain? Is anyone guarding it? The back mountain mine had been tapped out a century ago. These days, it was only used for new disciple trials to scavenge for scrap spirit stones. No one went there. I heard that adding scrap spirit stones to the soil can improve the quality of spirit herbs. I lied, trying to sound helpful. I was thinking of heading into the mine in my spare time to collect some for the garden. Would that be okay? Mo Fei laughed. Of course. The elders might even praise your diligence, though they rarely visit. Don't expect any extra rewards, though. That was all I needed to hear. Now I had a perfect excuse to visit the mine whenever I wanted. Let's get you settled, Mo Fei said. He flicked his wrist, and a flying sword expanded to 20 feet long, hovering just off the ground. He hopped on and beckoned me to join him. I stood at the front, and as he gripped my shoulder, we surged into the sky. The wind whistled past my ears. Below us, the landscape blurred into a beautiful tapestry of green and gold. I couldn't help but feel a surge of envy. How long until I can fly like this? I asked. Level 6 of Chi refining for short bursts, he explained. But for true flight, you need to reach the foundation building stage. And teleportation? That's only for the old monsters at the nascent soul stage. I've never even seen it myself. We flew over a large lake with a small island in the center. Mo Fei pointed to it, telling me that was where he lived. As we approached the Spirit Beast Park, he steered the sword in a wide arc. He was serious about not disturbing those guests. Behind the park lay the Spirit Herb Garden. It was a charming plot of land enclosed by a fence covered in lush vines. A small stream trickled down from the mountain, providing water for both the plants and the caretaker. We landed at the gate, and Mo Fei shouted for a man named Lu San. A young man came running out of a small house, looking breathless. This is Lin Yuan, Mo Fei introduced me. He's our top new disciple, and he's volunteered to take over the garden. You're free to move to a new post now. Lu San looked like he'd just won the lottery. He was more than happy to hand over the keys. Mo Fei patted my shoulder one last time, telling me to visit his island if I had any trouble with my cultivation. Then he took to the sky and vanished. I looked around my new domain. It wasn't much, but it was mine. And more importantly, it was the perfect cover for whatever came next. The work in the Spirit Herb Garden wasn't actually hard. The real challenge wasn't the sect tasks at all, but a crazy old man named Uncle Feng. He didn't care about food or his appearance, but he was obsessed with the spiritual herbs Lu San grew. He was a nightmare to please. Every time one of his alchemy attempts failed, he'd storm over to blame Lu San. He'd complain the herbs lacked spiritual energy, or they weren't old enough, or the water and light were wrong. He even complained if there was a tiny bug bite on a single leaf. These were things a low-level worker like Lu San couldn't possibly control. To make matters worse, Uncle Feng had cordoned off a section of the garden for himself, declaring those herbs his personal property. Before leaving, Lu San handed me a checklist of the herbs the sect required every quarter. He also gave me an illustrated guidebook so I could identify the plants and understand their uses. We did a quick walkthrough of the small houses on the property, and the handover was done. Lu San made sure to point out Uncle Feng's private plot one last time. I looked it over and noticed the herbs there were rare, but they looked sickly. It was obvious that Uncle Feng was a terrible gardener. I chose the house furthest to the edge and settled in. I'd spent the entire night in the mines, and I was exhausted. I grabbed a basin of water from the stream in the corner of the garden to wash up. I figured that aside from Uncle Fong, very few disciples would ever come here. It was vast and lonely, with every disciple minding their own business. It was the perfect quiet spot. Then again, those 2 houses on the cliff back at the mine were even quieter. If I needed total isolation later, I could always head back there. I remembered the 3 low-grade spirit stones I'd received earlier. I shut my door tight and pulled them out along with my apocalypse bead. It was time for an upgrade. Within the time it takes a stick of incense to burn, the 3 stones transformed into glowing green mid-grade spirit stones. The small room instantly filled with dense spiritual energy. The mist coming off the bead was thicker than ever before. I sat there, wondering how else I could use this energy besides just meditating. My mind flashed back to autumn mornings in the countryside. Fog was just tiny water droplets in the air. Steam from a boiling pot was the same thing. Mist, droplets, water. A spark of inspiration hit me. I dropped the apocalypse bead directly into my wash basin. The bead stopped emitting mist immediately. Instead, the clear water began to swirl with color, turning a milky grayish white. After a while, the entire basin was filled with a thick, fragrant liquid. It wasn't pure spiritual essence because of the volume of water, but based on the scent and color, I judged it to be better than scrap stones, though slightly weaker than a low-grade spirit stone. It wasn't pure enough for me to use for cultivation, but it was perfect for the garden. These herbs were currently growing in ordinary soil. They had never tasted the luxury of spiritual liquid before. Even if the quality wasn't top tier, it would be a massive boost for them. I tucked the bead away, picked up the basin, and walked over to Uncle Feng's private plot. I found a plant with withered leaves and a drooping stem. I splashed some liquid on its leaves and poured the rest into the soil at its roots. I'd have to wait a few days to see if it made a difference. My plan for tomorrow was set. I'd head into the mines. I'd clear out 1 or 2 tunnels at a time to collect scrap stones, then spend the rest of my time practicing the chi refining techniques the sect gave me. I pulled out the small booklet containing the first 3 levels of chi refining and began to read. This was the start of my true journey. The booklet was filled with detailed diagrams. The first page showed the human meridian system with every acupoint labeled. Another diagram showed the exact path spiritual energy should take once it entered the body. The goal of the first level was simple: teach a mortal how to breathe in the energy of heaven and earth. In most places, spiritual energy is thin. Without help, a mortal might practice for decades and never succeed. That's why cultivators need a constant supply of spirit stones. People who progress slowly aren't always untalented. Often, they just don't have enough stones. This shortage followed a cultivator forever. Whether you were breaking into the foundation building stage or aiming for the nascent soul realm, you always needed more energy than you had. Even the great nascent soul masters, who had plenty of low-grade stones, struggled because they required rare mid-grade stones to keep improving. The first level of chi refining was about accumulation. You had to gather as much energy as possible until it reached a breaking point. Once it hit that threshold, it would explode through the body, washing the marrow and changing the physical form to prepare it for a lifetime of cultivation. I sat in a cross-legged position. I placed several of my purified low-grade stones in my palms and rested them on my lap. I stared at the flow chart in the booklet, closed my eyes, and tried to guide the energy to move through my body. During my entrance test, my energy speed had been rated as orange, and my absorption rate had literally broken the scale. Now, it was time to see what I could really do. Cloud Sea Sect set up those entrance tests for a reason. A cultivator's speed and absorption rate determine everything. If you can't move energy fast or hold on to it, you won't get far. I felt the spiritual energy enter my body. It followed the path from the diagram, cycling through my meridians again and again. As it flowed through my pressure points, my body soaked it up like a dry sponge. Luckily, I had a pile of purified stones in my hands. New energy poured into me constantly, keeping the flow from breaking. Suddenly, I felt a stone in my palm go cold. It turned from white to a dull, dark gray. I tossed it aside. The moment it hit the floor, it shattered into tiny pieces. It was completely drained. I was amazed. So this was how stones were consumed. I didn't waste time and moved my fingers to the next stone, pulling more energy in. An hour passed. I had burned through almost every stone in my hand, but I didn't feel the sensation the manual described. It said my meridians should feel full and tight. I felt nothing. I reached out and grabbed dozens more low-grade stones. I kept a few in my hand and piled the rest in front of me. I had no idea how insane this was. If the other disciples saw me, they would have lost their minds. Even the inner disciples and foundation-building elders would be jealous. An outer disciple only gets 1 stone every 2 months. An inner disciple gets 3 a month. Even an elder only gets about 100. They have to save and scrape to get by. Most people train using the thin energy in the air because they can't afford stones. Nobody spends dozens of stones on their very first session. If the whole sect saw me right now, they'd probably beat me up out of pure envy. I also didn't realize why I wasn't feeling any pain. The manual said the first level of chi refining was a brutal process of washing the marrow and remodeling the body. It was supposed to be agonizing. But the apocalypse bead had already done a perfect job of that for me. My foundation was already flawless. I didn't need to suffer. I just needed to fill the tank. I kept going. 10 stones in, I finally felt a slight fullness in my meridians. 15 stones in, they started to feel tight. By the 20th stone, my entire body was pulsing. Every pressure point felt like it was expanding, pushing against my skin. When I hit the 22nd stone, my meridians began to throb violently. Then, a loud boom echoed inside my head. It felt like a heavy shackle had snapped deep inside me. The stone in my hand turned to dust instantly. I stood up. The internal chaos vanished, replaced by a deep, calm stillness. I squeezed my fists. I felt a level of power I had never known. I walked outside and gave a light experimental hop. I soared 2 yards into the air and landed 5 yards away. I picked up a rock the size of my fist and squeezed. It didn't shatter completely, but my fingers sank into it, leaving 5 deep prints as stone dust trickled through my grip. I was only at the first level of chi refining, but I was already as strong as a top-tier martial arts master. It was hard to believe. Most mortals spend their lives dreaming of this kind of strength. I went back inside and looked at the pile of gray dust on the floor. 22 stones for 1 level. Was my body different because of the apocalypse bead? Did I need more energy than others? I thought about the inner disciples getting only 3 stones a month. That seemed so stingy. If the sect leader heard me say that, he'd probably cough up blood. Running a sect of 2,000 people is expensive. Between salaries and rewards, they spend hundreds of thousands of stones a year. They move the entire sect just to be near a new mine, but even mines run dry. Most disciples are incredibly careful. They plan for days before using a single stone, terrified of wasting even a drop of energy. They only get to eat meat once a month when their allowance arrives. I was living like a billionaire compared to them. The next morning, I woke up feeling refreshed. I knew that high-level cultivators eventually stop sleeping and just meditate, but I wasn't there yet. I still had the habits of a normal person. I cleaned up the stone fragments and buried them in my spirit herb garden. If anyone asked why I was collecting junk stones from the mines, I had my excuse ready. I was just using the leftover scraps to improve the soil for my herbs. It was the perfect cover. After all, I had a lot more recycling to do. I decided to mix a little of that gray liquid from the apocalypse bead with water for my garden. If the herbs and spirit plants grew stronger and more vibrant, it would provide the perfect cover. If anyone asked why I had piles of useless stone fragments, I'd just say the herbs were sucking the energy out of them. It was a bit of a stretch, but it was a plan. I grinned to myself. It was time to head back to the mines and restock. Even though I was technically a rich man in this world, I still felt uneasy after using 22 stones in one night. I had no idea how many more I'd need as I kept cultivating. I had a whole year here, and my new mission was clear: sweep the mines every few days until I'd picked them clean. As I reached the edge of the mine plaza, I realized my vision had improved. Reaching the first level of chi refining had sharpened my eyes. I could see the outlines of objects in the dark now, enough to walk without tripping. Still, to find the tiny energy stones, I needed my night pearl. I thought of the little golden eagle. Since the herb garden was so close to the mines now, I had a proper home base. It would be easy to visit her. I held up my glowing pearl and stepped into the tunnels, picking up stray stones as I made my way toward the platform where we first met. I'd left her a few stones yesterday, so she probably wasn't hungry yet, but I wanted to check in. Walking through these tunnels felt like picking up free money. To everyone else, these were poison stones, useless trash. To me, they were pure treasure. If the other disciples knew I was picking up hundreds of stones in a single walk while they slaved away for 3 a month, they wouldn't just be jealous. They'd probably spit on me and call me a lucky bastard. I reached the platform and looked at the small hole in the wall. "Hey, you have a visitor," I shouted. Silence. No golden head popped out. I figured she was out hunting. I used to do the same thing back home, wandering deep into the woods for a kill, but I always came back. I decided to keep moving and gather more stones while I waited. An hour passed. I cleared several platforms until I reached a dead end. The tunnel simply stopped. I was about to turn back when I noticed another small hole in the wall, about waist high. It looked exactly like the eagle's first nest. "Did you find a second home?" I muttered. "Hey, anyone in there?" This time, there was a response. A tiny golden head poked out, followed by a small body. It was her, golden feathers, with that distinct splash of red on her tail. "Xiaojin, want to come with me?" I asked, reaching out. I liked the name. It suited her. Xiaojin hopped onto my palm. She sniffed me, tilting her head. She could tell I was different. My chi was stronger now, my energy more vibrant. I started to turn back toward the garden, but she suddenly jumped down and ran back into the hole. She poked her head out and chirped at me frantically. I pulled out a few stones to give to her, thinking she wanted a snack before we left. She didn't take them. Instead, she disappeared back into the hole. I heard a faint scratching sound, and then she re-emerged, carrying a stone in her beak. I blinked. It was a spirit stone, but it wasn't one of mine. The stones I purified were bright white and hummed with energy. This one was duller, a standard, low-grade spirit stone. Before I could process that, she went back in and brought out another one. She stood at the entrance, looking from the hole to me, chirping her head off. "No way," I whispered. "Is there a hidden vein in there?" I got excited. My prepper instincts kicked in. I started pulling tools out of my storage ring. A hoe, a machete, a crowbar, a hammer, a pickaxe, even a manure shovel. Xiaojin looked stunned as a pile of hardware appeared out of thin air. I had a bit of an obsession with packing everything from my old life. You never know when you'll need a shovel. I set Xiaojin on my shoulder and grabbed the shovel. I started digging, widening the hole she had started. When I hit hard rock, I switched to the crowbar. My new strength was a godsend. Yesterday, I would have been exhausted in minutes, but now I felt like I had endless energy. I dug about 10 feet in when I saw it, a flash of white. I swung the hoe like a madman. A few more feet, and the prize was revealed. It was a massive chunk of spirit stone, or about the size of a large hog. If I cut this into standard sizes, I'd have hundreds of stones. But in my hands, after purification, this wasn't just low-grade ore. This was a giant, pig-sized pile of mid-grade spirit stones. I was officially rich. I couldn't help myself. I grabbed Xiaojin and kissed her right on the head. I was so excited I accidentally got a bit of spit on her feathers. She chirped indignantly, using her talons to wipe her head with a look of pure disgust. I reached out and touched the ore. In a flash, it vanished into my ring. Xiaojin panicked. She jumped to the spot where the pig had been, scratching at the dirt and looking around wildly. "Don't worry, it's right here," I laughed. I pulled it back out, then put it back in. I did it a few more times until she finally understood. It wasn't gone, it was just in my pocket. I handed her one of my purified stones as a reward. She hopped onto my shoulder and started munching on it happily. My purified stones tasted much better than the wild ones. With a heavy ring and a happy eagle, I headed back home. Today was a very good day. I decided to call it a day. I could come back another time to finish gathering the smaller scraps. Before I even reached the platform where the first small tunnel was located, Xiaojin bolted ahead of me. By the time I caught up, she had already lined up 6 or 7 snacks on the ground. She had even dragged out the half-eaten one from earlier. She dove back into the hole one last time, and emerged dragging another piece. These were all the stones I had tossed to her yesterday as a gift. She was done moving her stash now, but she had a problem. She tried to pick them up. She grabbed one in her left claw and another in her right. She even stuffed one into her beak. But there were still several pieces left on the ground. She started to panic. She would pick one up, only for another to tumble out of her grip. She scrambled around, trying to hoard them all at once. Moving house is a bit of a hassle, isn't it, Xiaojin? I chuckled. Watch this. I reached out and swept the stones into my ring, leaving only the one she had already started nibbling on. Then, just to reassure her, I pulled them back out and set them on the ground before stowing them away again. She stared at the empty spot, then at my hand. She finally understood. Her treasures weren't lost. They were just safe. Let's go, I said, heading toward the cave entrance. Xiaojin grabbed her half-eaten stone and chased after me. I patted my sleeve, and she hopped up, disappearing into the fabric to hide. Finding that massive chunk of ore was a huge win, and Xiaojin deserved all the credit. I didn't have many treasures yet, but with this mine, I'd never run out of stones to keep her fed. The herb garden was close enough that she could fly back and forth whenever she wanted to forage for scraps. They didn't taste as good as the purified ones, but they would do in a pinch. My first priority back at the garden was to evolve that giant slab of ore into mid-grade stones. I had burned through a lot of low-grade stones during my cultivation yesterday. I wondered what would happen if I used mid-grade stones instead. I actually had one small mid-grade stone already. It was the sample piece the sect had given me, which I had purified earlier. It was tiny, but powerful. The herb garden was peaceful when I arrived, save for the occasional chirp of a cricket. As soon as I stepped inside, Xiaojin leaped from my sleeve. She dashed straight toward the patch of herbs I had watered with spirit liquid last night. She was a spirit beast, after all. Her nose for spiritual energy was incredible. It was that same instinct that made her kind so valuable to sects for finding ore veins. Without her, I never would have found that pig-sized treasure. Since no one was around, I let her play in the garden. I went into my room and locked the door. I pulled out the massive ore. It was time to cut it down. A slab that big was impossible to use. I tried my hoe and my crowbar, but I couldn't even leave a scratch on it. Normal tools were useless against raw spirit stone, or these stones only became brittle once their energy was completely drained. While they were full, they were as hard as diamonds. Then I remembered the dagger I'd taken from the unconscious Wang Yin back in the mine. It had sliced into a stone floor like it was butter. I pulled it from my ring and unsheathed it. 2 characters were etched into the blade. Fei Lu. I felt a pulse of energy the moment I gripped the hilt. This wasn't a normal weapon. It was a spiritual tool. There was no way a thug like Wang Yin owned this. Someone powerful must have lent it to him. I pressed the blade against the ore and pushed. It went through with almost no resistance. The Fei Lu dagger lived up to its reputation. It sliced through the rock like a hot knife through wax. I didn't care about making perfect shapes. I wasn't planning on trading these. Since they were for my own use, it didn't matter if they were ugly. I hacked the ore into rough, palm-sized chunks. Once I was done, I tossed the low-grade pieces into my storage ring, piling them near the apocalypse bead. I'd let them sit there and evolve slowly in the dark. It was the safest way. I pulled out that tiny mid-grade stone again, the one I'd purified from the sect sample. It was a brilliant, translucent green, vibrating with thick energy. Even though it was only a tenth of the size of a standard stone, the energy inside felt massive. I didn't have a master to teach me the secrets of cultivation, but I had the resources to experiment. I was already at the first level of chi refining. My job now was to use the technique to circulate energy, washing it through my meridians and strengthening my body. Eventually, my divine sense would grow strong enough to leave my body. That would be the sign I had reached the second level. I gripped the tiny green stone tightly in my hand. It was time to see what it could really do.